Chapter 1283. After the magic treasure in the center said that, the entire world became silent. After a while, one of the level 7 pseudo-sage cultivators suddenly said, "Your senior Buddhist Supreme's magic treasure? Did you summon us here for the inheritance of Senior Supreme Buddha? That's too boring. Master is one of the existences closest to becoming a sage. Obtaining his inheritance is equivalent to obtaining a path to heaven. Why would it be boring?" The voice of the magic treasure seemed to be a little doubtful. When this voice sounded, the entire world trembled slightly. One could faintly feel an indescribable sense of acceptance surrounding them. Path to heaven? There were 54 sages in the origin world, and the number of disciples they had accepted didn't exceed 100 million, but there were at least tens of millions. But since ancient times, which disciple of these sages has truly become a sage? Even the sages don't dare to say that obtaining his inheritance will open a path to heaven. Furthermore, the Buddhist Supreme is only a level 9 fake sage, the level 7 fake sage said indifferently. Is that so? So that's what you think. However, I think you have some misunderstandings about Master's inheritance. However, the magic treasure said calmly. It didn't seem like it was dissatisfied with the grade 7 false sage's words at all. What kind of misunderstanding? Senior, please explain. The level 7 fake sage said. The magic treasure said indifferently, Master's inheritance is an opportunity. As for what it is, I can't say now. All you need to know is that only by obtaining this opportunity will you have the chance to achieve your ultimate goal. If you don't have this opportunity, even if you try your best, you will still fail at the final stage. Opportunity. This caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Even Luo Fan, who originally had no interest in this inheritance, couldn't help but have his eyes light up. Among all the people present, the weakest was at the pseudo-saint level. Of course, excluding the numerous creatures created by Luo Fan with the help of the law of causality on that ship. Who would be a fool to face such an existence? When the magic treasure said this, everyone realized that this opportunity was most likely in this world. It was a must for all cultivators who wanted to become a sage. In fact, they had already faintly guessed that perhaps the Buddhist venerable had died because he had fought for this opportunity. In the end, he had no choice but to shatter his magic treasures and scatter them to various locations in the origin world. Then, every 100,000 years, he would return to the origin world. Then, it would be condensed once again, bringing an uncountable number of pseudo-saint level existences to inherit this opportunity. What do you think? Are you interested in this inheritance now? The magic treasure said with a hint of amusement in its voice. It seemed that this kind of thing had happened countless times. Moreover, it seemed that this kind of thing had become a kind of pleasure for him. I'm naturally very interested in opportunities. I wonder how you obtained the inheritance? The level 7 pseudo-sage's eyes lit up, seeing his expression. All the other pseudo-saints couldn't help but move away from him. There was only one chance, and there were dozens of people present. It was obvious that during the inheritance process there would be a lot of people. There would definitely be competition and even killing. The level 7 pseudo-sage seemed to be the most powerful existence among all the pseudo-sages present, so they would naturally be wary of him first. However, although they were on guard, they didn't give up fighting for the opportunity just because of how powerful the level 7 pseudo-sage was. Of course, this was because the opportunity was extremely rare, and it was very likely related to whether they could become sages. However, at the same time, it was also because they didn't believe that the Buddhist venerable would gather all of them here without thinking it through. Since the Buddhist venerable gathered dozens of cultivators with different cultivation realms, it obviously meant that everyone had a chance of obtaining that opportunity. Otherwise, the Buddhist venerable would be doing useless things by gathering them here. Obviously, even they wouldn't do useless things. Because of this consideration, Although everyone present was already wary of the level 7 pseudo-sage, none of them had the thought of giving up. The level 7 pseudo-sage obviously knew that this situation was inevitable, so he didn't care about everyone's avoidance and vigilance. He didn't make a move against them at this time, and instead eliminated many competitors first. Very well, since all of you have agreed to accept the inheritance. Then, let's begin. This time, my 10 trillion years of accumulation can only maintain this world for 10 years at most. If none of you can pass the test within 10 years and obtain the true legacy, then the next time we'll have to wait for another 10 trillion years, the magic treasure said. 10 years. Luo Fan couldn't help but frown. 10 years might be a long time for ordinary living beings, but for cultivators at Luo Fan's level, 10 years was like the blink of an eye. A level 9 pseudo-sage treasure's 10 trillion years of accumulation could only support the test for 10 years. This was enough to show how difficult this test was, which made him feel surprised and worried. As soon as the voice from the magic treasure finished speaking, a strange change occurred. The entire world's time came to a standstill. Then, the entire world's space changed along with the overturning sky mansion. Hundreds of millions of mysterious worlds were born out of thin air. The way these worlds were born was extremely mysterious, and it was completely different from what Luo Fan had expected. Luo Fan had opened up many worlds and seen the birth and destruction of many worlds, but he had never seen the way these worlds were born. The way these hundreds of millions of worlds were born was as if they had always existed there, but they had always been covered by some kind of fog. Now that the fog had been swept away, these worlds were revealed once again. Such a process was truly traceless and unimaginably profound. In the process of the birth of this world, Luo Fan faintly felt some kind of reversal of the law of cause and effect. There were even many other mysteries that he couldn't understand right now that were also included in the whole process. He felt the countless complicated and mysterious changes. Luo Fan couldn't help but think, Supreme Buddha is indeed one of the existences closest to sages. Just what he's doing with his magic treasure is already not something that an ordinary level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator can do. After the hundreds of millions of worlds were formed, Luo Fan suddenly felt that everything in his body was being suppressed by some kind of powerful force. Even his memories, his magic power, and his strength were constantly being lost under some kind of incredible power. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan was taken aback and suddenly roared. He raised his hand and patted his head. In an instant, he performed the first level of the law of causality. The hundreds of millions of uses of the law of causality ultimately led to the same goal, which was his memories. With this extremely deep and exquisite use of the first level of the law of causality, Luo Fan finally managed to keep his memories at the last moment. It allowed him to still remember who he was, why he was here, his goals, and everything else about him. However, that was all. His strength, his magic power. In fact, all of his extraordinary characteristics were instantly eliminated by that strange power. To be more precise, it was not eliminated, but sealed. Blocked. This kind of seal, this kind of shielding. As a result, he could no longer display any extraordinary power. His entire body was sucked into one of the hundreds of millions of worlds. At the last moment when he entered that world, he even saw the many living beings that Luo Fan had created with the law of causality on the ship. Regardless of whether it was the boy or the others, they were all captured by a certain world and scattered into that world. Even the ship itself had been tossed into another world. Obviously, they were also qualified to compete for the inheritance of the Supreme Buddha. This was something that Luo Fan had not expected. Apart from his memories, all of Luo Fan's extraordinary powers had been completely sealed. Being able to see these at the last moment was already the result of his eyesight being pushed to the limit. It was impossible for him to see more. In the blink of an eye, he found that he was already in a brand new world. Everything that happened in the world that could not be described with words, its colors, or even its composition seemed to have become an illusion and disappeared without a trace. He even had a vague feeling that he was born in this world, grew up in this world, and would definitely die in this world. He looked around and found that he was now in a modern city. This modern city was almost exactly the same as the Earth before he transmigrated. There was a computer in the room, a Simmons bed, and even a few packets of instant noodles. An Apple phone that was released a few years ago and was now discontinued was placed on the table. All of this made him feel as if he had returned to the time before he transmigrated. Fortunately, I retained my memories. Otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't even be able to discover that all of this is fake. Luo Fan touched the table in front of him and felt the extremely familiar feeling. He could not help but smile bitterly. The Buddha's methods were many times stronger than those who used illusions to test people's hearts. This was a complete, real world, and everything that made up this world was even more perfect. Under such circumstances, it was simply impossible to discover the falseness of this world and the illusion of one's own memories by discovering the nothingness and illusion. But what exactly is the Buddha testing me? Is it a test of my Taoist heart? Impossible. To be able to cultivate to this stage, who would have a weak Taoist heart? If it's a test of Taoist heart, anyone can achieve absolute perfection. Luo Fan sighed, stood up, opened the window, and looked out. The room he was in was on the 9th floor, nearly 30 meters above the ground. There were old buildings around him. Below him, there was an endless stream of traffic, loud noises, and exhaust. It made Luo Fan feel extremely familiar, but also inexplicably strange. The familiar feeling was brought about by his body, but the strange feeling was brought about by his still intact memory. It's actually exactly the same as the city I lived in. Luo Fan recognized many landmark buildings at a glance and thought to himself. He thought. He closed the window and walked to the toilet with familiarity. He looked at the mirror on the sink. A pale-faced, sloppily dressed, unkempt bearded man who looked to be in his 30s appeared in the mirror. This was obviously the body given to him by this world, or rather, the body after the Buddha's magic treasure changed him. Such a body, except for the unusually bright divine light in his eyes. He really looked like a decadent otaku. I didn't expect that one day I would become like this. Luo Fan sighed, found a razor in the room, and shaved his beard. After shaving his beard, his entire spirit and temperament changed quite a bit. But he still looked a little sloppy and decadent. After looking at it, he knew that it was because of his hair. Without hesitation, he directly used the razor to cut his hair. His body, his strength, and even his flexibility were only in the category of ordinary people, but his memory was still the memory of a powerful level 1 pseudo-sage. With such a memory, his ability to control his body was strong. But it was beyond the scope of all mortals. Even with only a razor, he easily cut his hair into a very energetic crew cut in a few minutes. After doing all this, he looked at the person in the mirror again, but his spirit and appearance had changed greatly. The appearance that was not outstanding at first. Under the contrast of his eyes, he could almost be compared with any star. Now the sloppy clothes on his body no longer looked sloppy. He no longer looked sloppy. Instead, he gave off a carefree feeling. That's about it. Let me see what you want to test. Luo Fan looked at his appearance, smiled slightly, changed into a t-shirt, jeans, put on high-top leather shoes, and went out. The place where the Buddha's magic treasure let him live was obviously a typical city residence. Here, the relationship between neighbors had long been cold to the extreme. Not to mention that there was no ambiguous relationship between the legendary beautiful neighbors. He didn't even know whether there was anyone next door, whether there was a man or a woman living there. When going downstairs, a few people passed by Luo Fan, but they just glanced at him in surprise, and didn't even nod. Obviously, they didn't know Luo Fan's body at all. Luo Fan just smiled at this, and didn't care at all. After leaving the building where he lived, Luo Fan wandered around casually, carefully observing the many situations in this world, and carefully thinking about what the magic treasure wanted to do by sending him into this world, and what exactly it wanted to do. However, it was obvious that the purpose of the magic treasure was too deep. After walking around for a day, Luo Fan didn't see any abnormalities at all. Everything was so normal, at least everything he saw was as normal as everything he saw on Earth before he transmigrated. Those who should do business were doing business, those who should be busy were busy, those who should be playing were playing, those who should be going to school were going to school, and those who should be quarreling were quarreling. Everything seemed to indicate that he had returned to the Earth before he transmigrated. This body was completely the body of an ordinary person, and he was already exhausted after just walking around for a day. Looking around, Luo Fan found that he was already a few kilometers away from where he lived at some point in time. He was too lazy to return to the birdcage-like room, so he directly picked a self-service ATM by the roadside and walked over. If Luo Fan wanted to withdraw money from the ATM before he transmigrated, unless he smashed the ATM, he could only follow the rules of the ATM and use his bank card. However, for the current him, there was no need to go through so much trouble. Wisdom was brought about by memory. Luo Fan now had an unknown number of billions of years of memory, so his wisdom was naturally deep and broad. With his wisdom, he found the loophole of the ATM after a few random experiments. With the cooperation of more than a dozen buttons, he had already broken through the ATM system in a short 5 to 6 minutes. He easily used the ATM as his own wallet, and took out tens of thousands of cash. He even destroyed the ATM surveillance system in the end, so that the ATM could not detect that he had withdrawn money from it at all. After doing all this, Luo Fan took tens of thousands of cash and checked into the most luxurious room in a nearby hotel. Let me see what the consequences of what I have done will be. Standing outside the window of the hotel room, Luo Fan thought as he looked at the gradually darkening night outside. Any test, no matter what kind of test it was, whether it was a test of Taoist heart, a test of strength, a test of aptitude, or a test of comprehension, all tests had to have changes. Therefore, although he did not know what the Buddhist Supreme's magic treasure was testing him on, or what kind of test it was relying on to determine who the Buddhist Supreme's inheritance should be handed over to, since it was a test, there would definitely be changes. Right now, he was acting recklessly, not because he wanted to do as he pleased, but because he wanted to give the changes a reason. He wanted to see what the test was through the possible changes. He wanted to understand what the test was, and then understand how to pass the test. Chapter 1284. Things did not go as Luo Fan had expected, and things changed very quickly. In fact, there were no changes even after a few months. In the past few months, Luo Fan wandered around recklessly and almost traveled all over the planet. He had really achieved the legendary traveling at will. Whenever he needed money, he would use his own skills to withdraw it from any ATM. He lived in the most luxurious place and ate the most luxurious and delicious food. When he was on a whim, he would stay in a certain place for a few days. If he saw something he didn't like, he would intervene. Whether it was a massacre or torture, nothing was out of the question. However, even if he acted recklessly and created many conditions that could cause changes in this world, the development of this world was no different from that of a normal world. No matter what he did, as long as he erased all traces that could be detected by ordinary people, he would not cause any changes in this world at all. What exactly is this test? 10 years. This is not a very long time. On this day, Luo Fan stood on the Eiffel Tower and looked at the romantic city. His expression was calm, but he was secretly puzzled. In the past few months, although he had enjoyed the rare relaxation and comfort, he was still confused about the purpose of the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. He had no idea what it wanted to do and how it wanted to test him. This kind of feeling was obviously not good. Do I have to waste 10 years just like this? Luo Fan sighed and took a step forward. His figure stepped out of the Eiffel Tower out of thin air. Of course, he was not trying to commit suicide. In the past few months, although he did not find a way to break the seal of the magical wave on his power and Dharma power. However, by analyzing the laws of this world, he regained some extraordinary power. At this moment, he took a step forward, but his body was directly suspended in the air, as if he was not affected by gravity at all. He could easily fly in the air. Such a change was seen by others, and it instantly caused a commotion. The sound of camera clicking could be heard continuously. After a while, on the internet, the image of Luo Fan floating in the air appeared. However, these photos and even videos were treated as special effects, the result of Photoshop. There were not many people who took them seriously. The commotion caused was only limited to those who had seen Luo Fan fly in the air with their own eyes. Luo Fan had experienced the process of pretending to be an ordinary person in this world for the past few months, and he had long since lost that kind of patience. With a thought, he shot up into the sky and headed toward the most powerful country on this planet, the United States. He was so arrogant. His reckless attitude was soon discovered by the governments of all the countries in the world. At that moment, countless satellites of all kinds locked onto his figure. When Luo Fan flew above the Pacific Ocean, dozens of fighter jets appeared in front of him. The missiles on the fighter jet were fully prepared and locked onto him. Luo Fan couldn't be bothered to talk to these fighter jets. He raised his hand and pressed it towards them. In an instant, the internal environment of these fighter jets changed slightly. This slight change instantly destroyed the internal balance of the fighter jet. It caused the dozens of fighter jets to explode in an instant, completely turning into balls of fire and disappearing into the void. For the big countries in this world, such a manic change was simply anti-human and antisocial. At that moment, the highest alert was raised. This time, there were no fighter jets coming. Missiles were launched from within the territory of the United States, directly passing through half of the Pacific Ocean and being thrown at him. Luo Fan was just disdainful of these missiles. At that moment, Luo Fan, who had analyzed part of the rules of this world, would not be hurt even if these missiles exploded on him. Moreover, the speed of these missiles was so average that it was extremely easy for him to dodge them. However, although it was so easy to dodge these missiles, Luo Fan couldn't be bothered to do so. Of course, he didn't think of using his own body to measure the power of these missiles. He also casually pressed his hand and completely destroyed these missiles. After doing this, Luo Fan had already arrived in the territory of the United States. After arriving, he directly landed in the capital of the country, where the president was. Under the horrified gazes of the high-level officials, he easily took control of them and instantly took control of the country. He had obtained the most powerful country on this planet. Taking control of the country so easily might seem like child's play, but in fact it was very normal. Even if this country had many early warning mechanisms and a firm heart to resist, in the face of a powerful force like Luo Fan, it was all in vain. As long as there was a bud of resistance, he could instantly wipe it out and completely suppress it. Under such circumstances, how difficult would it be to take control of a country? After taking control of this country, Luo Fan didn't stop immediately. Instead, he directly used the power of this country to attack in all directions, directly setting off a world war. This country itself was the most powerful country in the entire world, and it had the ability to set off a world war without necessarily losing. Moreover, with Luo Fan in control of everything, he could disintegrate all threats of resistance. The result of setting off a world war was naturally obvious. In just a few months, the country controlled by Luo Fan unified the entire world, formed a huge world government, and controlled all the resources of the world. On this day, Luo Fan stood in the newly built God's Palace, overlooking the world he controlled with a faint look of doubt on his face. Even if he had unified the entire world, even if he had turned the entire world into his own private state, that kind of test did not befall him at all. Everything developed in the normal way and everything changed. Everything happened in the way that a normal world should have. The changes and tests that he expected did not appear at all. He actually made it go so smoothly. In just a few months, the situation of the entire world had been completely changed. Even this doesn't work? Then let's take it a step further. Luo Fan thought as he began to change the world. He passed down the results of his analysis of this world through orders, allowing more and more living beings in this world to understand the rules of this world, and also allowing more and more living beings to grasp extraordinary powers. Such extraordinary power was a devastating blow to modern technology, but it was also a kind of extraordinary enhancement. It was a devastating blow. Due to the existence of extraordinary powers, the present natural technology was no longer as useful as it was in the past. Many functions that seemed incomparably mystical in the past were no longer as useful to those who had grasped extraordinary powers. It was even simpler to say that it was a transcendent enhancement, because all living beings had mastered supernatural powers. Therefore, because of their own needs, they began to constantly modify modern technology, constantly developing technology in the direction of extraordinary. Such a change was naturally an extraordinary enhancement for modern technology. Under such circumstances, for the next 10 years, the entire world gradually accumulated endless changes from small to large, and finally, the entire world was completely changed. In just a short 10 years, the entire world had gone through a process that would take thousands or even tens of thousands of years to go through. The entire world had gone through a process that science fiction writers imagined would take thousands or even tens of thousands of years to go through. In an instant, the entire planet had completely changed. Vegetation almost covered the entire planet, and billions of people lived in the air, under the sea, and even in space in various special ways. Reporting to the Lord God, after trillions of times of research, the time attribute of this world has become abnormal. Since 10 years ago, the time segment of this world has become shorter and shorter. In the lookout, which had greatly changed its appearance, Luo Fan was listening to the report of a researcher in a lab coat. The time segment has become shorter? Luo Fan asked with a frown. After 10 years of development, the negative results caused by him conquering the entire world by force had long been buried without a trace in the huge changes he had made to the entire world in the past 10 years. Back then, when he created the temple for himself to live in, there was also the factor of his will to force it. But now, almost everyone in the entire world had become his believers, and they truly regarded him as the supreme God. Even the researcher, who was supposed to be extremely rational, looked at Luo Fan with fanaticism and faith. That way, even if Luo Fan wanted him to commit suicide immediately, he would not hesitate in the slightest. Reporting to the Lord God, the time segment is our definition of the time attribute. According to research, time and space, rules, and even all energy and matter are actually a unified entity that affects and depends on each other. Therefore, according to the unified rules, we give all other energy and matter a fixed value, and we get a constant of time. This constant is the time segment, the researcher explained hurriedly. I see. In that case, what does the shortening of the time segment mean? Luo Fan had a vague guess, but he still asked. Reporting to the Lord God, the shortening of the time segment means that the evolution of matter is getting faster and faster. In layman's terms, the flow of time in our world is getting faster and faster, the researcher said firmly. Upon hearing that, Luo Fan finally understood and couldn't help but smile. The flow of time is getting faster? Then have you figured out how much faster the flow of time is compared to 10 years ago? According to research, it is at least 10,000 times. However, this is not the final result. The time segment is still getting shorter rapidly. According to calculations, after 100 years, the chance of the time segment shrinking is almost equal to zero. No one knows what will happen then, but we think that it is very likely to be the end of the world, the researcher said with fanaticism in his eyes. When talking about the end of the world, the researcher didn't have any fear. He only had an inexplicable expectation, as if he was extremely hoping that the end of the world would come soon. The end of the world. Could this test be to prevent the arrival of the end of the world? Luo Fan made a slight deduction and found that it was very likely that the end of the world would really come at that time. Accelerating the flow of time was something that Luo Fan was very familiar with. He was naturally very clear about it. At that time, when the flow of time was accelerated to the limit and to infinity, what would happen, even if he didn't accelerate the flow of time in any world to that level, it didn't stop him from making deductions based on the impact of the accelerated flow of time on the world. According to his past experience, if the flow of time was accelerated beyond the limit of the world, then everything in this world would collapse in an instant, whether it was the nomological laws, time, space, or even the endless and incredible Great Tao. Everything would completely collapse and disappear in an instant. Then, everything in this world would disappear completely in an instant. Obviously, that would be the end of the world. Go down and continue your research. Of course, he wouldn't reveal his thoughts in front of the researcher. He just gave a faint order. After the researcher left, Luo Fan took a light step forward and arrived above the starry sky of this world. After 10 years, his analysis of the nomological laws of this world had improved. Although the power of his theurgy was far from what it was before his cultivation and magical power were completely sealed, he was almost omnipotent in this world. Let me find the source of the accelerated flow of time in this world. Luo Fan stood in the starry sky and thought. The starry sky of this world. It was naturally different from the universe on Earth. No matter how similar this world was to Earth, it was still not Earth. The starry sky of this world was naturally different from the starry sky of Earth. Apart from the solar system, all the other stars in this world were just specks of light in space. They were just specks of light in space, not stars at all. There were no planets, let alone other living beings. The starry sky where Luo Fan was now was surrounded by nothingness. In front of him was a solar system. The 9 planets revolved around the sun in the center according to various inexplicable laws. Between the planets, huge space stations floated in the void. Those were the technological achievements of the world that Luo Fan ruled over the past 10 years. Living in space was naturally extremely uncomfortable and fatal for ordinary living beings without extraordinary powers. However, for living beings with extraordinary powers, the environment was many times better than on the surface of a planet. This was because the extraordinary powers those living beings had were obtained by analyzing the rules and principles. The way they improved their extraordinary powers was to deepen their analysis of the rules and principles. On the surface of a planet, due to the interference of the planet itself, such analysis was extremely difficult. Compared to living in space, it was more than 10 times more difficult. It was precisely because of this that when the living beings of this world had the ability to build a perfect biosphere in space and provide living beings for living beings to live in, they were eager to live in space for the rest of their lives. It was also because of this that the surface of the planet had become like this. Luo Fan looked at the sun and the 9 planets. In his heart, he was constantly searching for the rules and principles of this world, searching for the source of the rapid flow of time. If Luo Fan had his original cultivation and powers, he would naturally be able to easily find the source of these rules and principles. Perhaps he did not even need the research results of those researchers to be able to sense that the flow of time in this world was constantly accelerating. In 100 years, it would surpass the limits of this world and destroy the entire world. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan's powers and cultivation had been sealed and shielded by the Buddhist Supreme's magic treasure. The reason why he had extraordinary powers and displayed such almost omnipotent might was mainly because of his analysis of the rules and principles of this world. In other words, he was actually just an ordinary person now. It was the operation of this world that gave him such extraordinary powers. Just like how ordinary people could not lift themselves, he had to use the extraordinary powers given to him by this world to resist the abnormalities of this world. It was obviously extremely difficult. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan could not sense the abnormalities of time in the past 10 years. Now, even though he could already sense the rules and principles, it was difficult for him to find the source of the abnormalities of time. The more specific and direct explanation was actually very simple. In fact, his own senses, his own observation ability, and everything else were actually changed by the abnormalities of time. Therefore, even if the abnormal thing was placed in front of him, it would appear completely normal. Under such circumstances, it was naturally almost impossible for him to discover the source of the abnormality. However, even so, Luo Fan did not have any intention of giving up. He was not sure whether stopping the destruction of this world was the test this time. However, he understood that this world was equivalent to an examination hall. It was impossible for any test to not have an examination hall. Therefore, regardless of whether stopping the destruction of this world was a test or not, as long as he wanted to pass the unknown test, he had to stop the destruction of this world. Chapter 1285. Now, Luo Fan no longer dared to think that it had only been 10 years since he entered this world. It was not just because he had been in this world for 10 years, but after being reminded by the researchers of this world, he had realized that the flow of time in this world could not be the normal flow of time at all. Compared to the world in the demon realm, the previous 10 years were not even a quarter of an hour or even a breath. Not to mention that the flow of time in this world would continue to accelerate and eventually accelerate to the point where it would exceed the limit that this world could bear. Under such circumstances, perhaps after 100 years in this world, the whole world would completely collapse, and not much time would have passed in the outside world. It was probably far from the limit of the time that the magic treasure could endure. This world is definitely not the last world. If I can't trigger the test in this world and pass the test, I will definitely be thrown into another world and experience a completely different life. Luo Fan clearly understood this. This was not difficult to guess. Originally, he did not think in this direction because the magic treasure said that it could only last for 10 years, and he could easily stay in this world for 10 years. But now, after knowing that the time in this world was so much faster than the outside world, Luo Fan finally recalled the changes in that world, and instantly deduced this fact. The worlds created by the magic treasure of the Buddha were counted in billions. With such a large number of worlds as the test venue, how many people would take part in the test? Even if the creatures created by Luo Fan with the law of causality were added, the number would only be 1,000 to 2,000. So many worlds, so few testers. If he didn't need so many worlds, then why would he need to create so many worlds for a magic treasure that could only last for 10 years? Therefore, there was only one possibility, and that was that this test was not limited to just one world. When a world could not pass the test, it would be thrown into another world. If the other world could not pass, it would continue to be thrown into a third world. This cycle would continue until the tester died, or until the end of the magic treasure's support. This feeling of controlling one world after another as an ordinary person was quite novel for Luo Fan. It was also quite interesting. However, compared to the opportunity to become a saint, the power he possessed, and the cultivation he possessed, this feeling of novelty was far from enough for him to be immersed in it. While Luo Fan was constantly searching for the source of the time anomaly in the world's laws, the time of this world slowly passed. Day after day, month after month, year after year, unknowingly, more than 90 years had passed. It was getting closer and closer to the end of the world that the researchers had predicted. And because of this change, more and more abnormalities appeared in this world. The development of science and technology in this world, in the past 90 years, was 10 times or even 100 times faster than the unimaginable progress in the first 10 years. Back then, only the researchers who studied this world under Luo Fan's orders knew about it. Now, almost everyone knew about the abnormality of time. However, even though science and technology had developed to the point where the entire solar system was almost unified into one, they still could not do anything about the abnormality of time. Even though the legendary time machine had been invented and countless people had traveled to the past on it. Some people had even traveled to the future to find a way to avoid the end of the world, but in the end there was no response at all. It was as if the time machine, which had been proven thousands of times, was simply a scam and did not send those time travelers back to the past or the future at all. Once the time machine was activated and they were sent away, they would disappear without a trace as if they had never existed. Under such circumstances, an inexplicable sense of panic and despair gradually spread throughout the world, speeding up the process of the world's doomsday. During these 90 years, Luo Fan had completely ignored all the changes in this world. He had been wholeheartedly paying attention to the laws and principles of this world. He had been paying attention to the hidden laws and principles that cause time to accelerate and the root cause of the end of the world. In the past 90 years, because of this search, his analysis of the laws of this world had become deeper and more complete. He even vaguely felt that he had become omnipotent in this world and was even close to being a saint. However, he did not understand the source of the abnormality of time at all. He could not find it at all. Although Luo Fan was still in the void, it was no longer the void that was completely empty. Instead, he was in a temple. This temple was not built by the living beings of this world under his orders, nor was it built by the living beings of this world because their god, Luo Fan, was here. Instead, it was naturally formed because of Luo Fan's continuous and in-depth analysis of the laws of this world. It seemed no different from the temple on the surface of the planet, but in fact it was completely the condensation of energy and laws. It even felt like it had been developed by this world after more than 100 years of development. Even a weapon that could completely destroy this world would not be able to destroy this temple. What exactly is it? Luo Fan sat on the throne of the temple and raised his hand to grab an invisible law. That strand of law was none other than the most fundamental law related to time among the laws of laws. From a certain point of view, this law could already be considered a time law. Although it was not the same existence as time itself in this world, it was no different from time in terms of its various characteristics and manifestations. Normally, any change in this nomological law would be directly reflected in the time of this world. For example, as long as Luo Fan slightly distorted this law, the time of this world within a certain range of this law would instantly distort. When Luo Fan broke this law, there would be a time fault and so on. However, no matter how hard Luo Fan searched, he could not find any abnormalities in this law. This law was like a normal world, the time law of a normal spacetime. No matter what changes Luo Fan made to this law, it would be reflected in the time of this world as if it were a normal world. Whether it was slowing down time or even reversing time or distorting time, there was no abnormality in all of this. Of course, among these changes, there was one that Luo Fan had never tried before. It was none other than speeding up time. It was not that he could not do it, but he could not make up his mind. The whole world was originally speeding up because of the constant acceleration of the flow of time. Now it was about to reach its limit and completely collapse, completely destroyed. If Luo Fan were to speed up time again, wouldn't he be pushing this world towards the end of the world? However, it would only make the collapse of this world faster, and it would be impossible to give Luo Fan more time. And this, at this time, was of course not a good choice for Luo Fan, who felt that there was not enough time. Maybe I should give it a try. Luo Fan grabbed this law, and an inexplicable smile suddenly appeared on his face. At this time, he suddenly thought it through. This time, the inheritance of the Buddha was also extremely precious to him, but he did not have to obtain it. It would naturally be of great benefit to him if he obtained it. It would allow him to see the sages in the demon realm more clearly, and perhaps he could comprehend a lot of mysteries that would be of great benefit to him. However, even if he could not obtain it, it would not be too much of a loss for him. He would still cultivate how he was originally supposed to cultivate. He would not despair because he lost this inheritance, nor would he relax because he obtained this inheritance, even. On a deeper level, even if one obtained the inheritance, it was only a chance to become a sage of the demon realm, and there seemed to be some gap between the sage of the demon realm and the sage of the earth universe. This was for those who wanted to be immortal and eternal. For Luo Fan, who wanted to become a real sage, the attraction was really not too strong. After understanding this, his heart suddenly became completely relaxed. Perhaps it's because of my mentality of worrying about gains and losses that I can't find the source of the time anomaly. Luo Fan thought and casually touched the law of time in his hand. With this touch, the flow of time around his body began to accelerate rapidly. Moreover, the range of this acceleration started from the moment he exited the temple and continued to spread in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it had spread to the entire world, causing the flow of time in the entire world to suddenly accelerate by hundreds of times, or even thousands of times. This world was already under extreme pressure because of the fast flow of time. Suddenly, time suddenly accelerated by hundreds or thousands of times, instantly exceeding the limits of this world. From where Luo Fan was, the whole world began to collapse at an unimaginable speed. The first thing to collapse was not anything else, but the natural formation of this world, which was almost the same as the surface of the planet, but could even withstand the attack of the weapon that could destroy the world. Following the collapse of this temple was space, followed by rules, laws, yuan qi, energy, matter, and finally time, which caused this world to collapse. The moment this world collapsed, Luo Fan suddenly saw a deeper existence hidden behind this world. This was the most common timekeeping instrument in this world, a pocket watch. This pocket watch was very normal. It was just that there were countless cracks that covered the entire surface of the pocket watch. The cracks had even faintly penetrated into the inside of the pocket watch. Through these cracks, one could even see that there were countless cracks on the gears and other components inside the pocket watch. This pocket watch was not moving in the normal order, but it was counting down. Moreover, what was extremely strange was that even though it had been destroyed to this extent, this pocket watch was still working normally. One could not see the countless cracks affecting its working ability at all. Luo Fan carefully analyzed the scale of this countdown and found that it was just a little bit away from reaching the end of the countdown. After this pocket watch appeared, it slowly floated towards Luo Fan and landed in Luo Fan's hands in a short while. Holding this pocket watch seemed like it could collapse at any time. However, Luo Fan suddenly came to a sudden realization that this pocket watch could split into countless pieces at any time. This time, the test was to find this pocket watch. This pocket watch represented this world's time, or rather, its lifespan. According to the way this pocket watch worked, it was obvious that its countdown wasn't just related to itself. It was also related to the lifespan of that world. Once this countdown reached 0, not only would the world be destroyed, but the pocket watch would also be completely destroyed in an instant. At that time, even if Luo Fan could still maintain his consciousness like now, he would only be able to see the pieces of the pocket watch. He would definitely not discover the existence of this pocket watch, nor would he know the essence of this pocket watch. Thus, he would miss this pocket watch. After the world collapsed and was destroyed, Luo Fan realized that the place where he was at had become a place with an indescribable color. It was also the world that he was brought to by the magic treasure fragment of the Buddhist Supreme. Of course, compared to when he had just entered this world, at this moment, the entire world had undergone earth-shattering changes. The billions of worlds were like billions of bubbles arranged in this world. This made this world seem like a world of bubbles. When Luo Fan returned to this place, the pocket watch suddenly emitted a faint, colorless light that poured into his body. In an instant, Luo Fan felt that his cultivation realm, his strength, and everything else had suddenly recovered a little. This wasn't much, it was only a billionth of his original strength. This was not much, only equivalent to a billionth of his original strength. Although the recovered strength wasn't much, Luo Fan still revealed a faint smile. Although the recovered strength wasn't much, Luo Fan still revealed a faint smile. After living in that world for more than 100 years without any strength, after living for more than 100 years, he could only rely on the power of the laws of that world to fly. Although the recovered strength wasn't much, it was enough to make him feel much better. So this is the effect of this pocket watch. It can actually recover the cultivation sealed by the magic treasure. Luo Fan thought to himself as he enjoyed the feeling of his body being filled with strength. He made a slight calculation. He already knew which world he had stayed in for more than 100 years, but in the outside world, less than 10 breaths of time had passed. Just when Luo Fan wanted to deduce more things, all of a sudden, everything was under some kind of powerful suppression. It was his own memory. His magic power and strength were under the effect of some unimaginable power, and the feeling of being continuously lost appeared out of nowhere. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan immediately raised his hand and slapped his head. The first level of the law of cause and effect was directly displayed, and the target of the first level of the law of cause and effect was also his memory. At this moment, the strength recovered by the pocket watch was only a billionth of Luo Fan's true strength, which was equivalent to a quasi-sage. Even though he was only relying on his own memories to barely execute the first level of the law of karma, the combined effect of the law of karma was tens of thousands of times weaker than the power he could unleash when he was at his peak. But fortunately, the suppression that appeared out of nowhere this time seemed to be only directed at his current strength and the memories that he had recovered. The power was also tens of thousands of times weaker than the suppression that completely suppressed Luo Fan to the point where only his memory was left. Under the situation where the two were weakened at the same time, Luo Fan was able to completely block this power at the last moment, and completely retain his memory. Of course, just like last time, he had just recovered some of his strength and cultivation. Under the same suppression, it was as if they never existed, and he could not feel them at all. Apart from his memory, he became an ordinary person again. After careful calculation, after leaving that world, the time that Luo Fan took to recover his cultivation and strength was only a few breaths of time. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan could only helplessly smile bitterly. Just as he smiled bitterly, a certain world suddenly produced a powerful suction force, which directly acted on his body. Normally, Luo Fan could still resist this suction force, but at this time, apart from his memory, he was basically an ordinary person. How could he resist the suction force produced by such a world? In the blink of an eye, his vision turned black, and he was directly sucked into that strange world. His vision suddenly turned black, but it was not because he had fainted, but because everything in the outside world had really turned pitch black. This kind of pitch black even made people feel that there was no concept of light in it. When his vision recovered, Luo Fan found that he had returned to a world that was extremely similar to the world he had transmigrated to before. Chapter 1286. So that's how it is. Could it be that these worlds change at any time? Luo Fan looked through the window and saw everything that was so familiar. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. At first glance, this world looked exactly the same as the previous one. Even his position was the same. However, he didn't need to investigate to know that there was a huge difference in the nature of this world and that world. After all, if there was no difference, why would there be a need to create this world? If he wanted to do something, wouldn't it be more convenient to do it in the previous world? What does this pocket watch represent? Luo Fan only had extraordinary memories, power, and cultivation. They were all limited to the level of a normal person. At this level, he clearly knew that this pocket watch contained endless mysteries and principles. However, he couldn't figure it out at all. In this world, I might have another mission, which is to study this pocket watch. Shaking the pocket watch, the bitter smile on Luo Fan's face gradually disappeared. Instead, it turned into a smile of anticipation. Although this pocket watch was filled with countless cracks, as though it would collapse if he shook it slightly, in reality, it was unimaginably sturdy. Even when Luo Fan shook it casually, the pocket watch didn't shake at all. It even felt more sturdy than a diamond. Feeling this characteristic of the pocket watch, Luo Fan had an idea. He threw the pocket watch towards the opposite side. Bang! The pocket watch hit the opposite wall and made a loud thud. Even the entire room shook from the impact. This wasn't an illusion. Although Luo Fan's current body was that of a normal person, his power was also that of a normal person. However, because he had his original memories, his control over his power had reached the acme of perfection. This body's original strength was fully unleashed by him. Even shattering a rock was a piece of cake for him. He threw out an object. So what if he threw an object and made the room shake? After this collision, there was a shallow pit on the opposite wall. A dent appeared on the lime that was originally pasted on the wall, revealing the bricks behind the lime. Luo Fan could even see cracks on the brick. It was as if it had been smashed. The pocket watch rolled on the ground. Luo Fan went forward to pick it up and looked at it. He found that the pocket watch was no different from before. The place that was originally a crack was still a crack. That was the place that was originally intact. It was still in good condition. From the looks of it, it was the same as before. It seemed that with just a slight shake, this pocket watch would instantly collapse and scatter. It was as if the collision that had created a shallow pit in the wall and caused the entire room to shake slightly had never happened. As expected, Luo Fan thought to himself as he looked at the unchanging pocket watch. This time, Luo Fan didn't immediately prepare to leave the room. Instead, he began to sit in the room and began to use his extraordinary memory to analyze the laws of this world. Although he had already analyzed the laws of the previous world that was extremely similar to this one and was almost omnipotent in that world, that was in that world. However, that was in that world. The results of his analysis in that world could not be used directly in this world. If he wanted to once again possess extraordinary power in this world, he would need to reanalyze it. Analyzing the laws of this world seemed to be a matter of consciousness. But in fact, with Luo Fan's current extraordinary memory, he didn't have any extraordinary power. If he wanted to first open the door to the analysis of the laws of this world, what he needed wasn't consciousness, but his body. It was the power that he possessed. Although all of his extraordinary powers had been blocked and sealed, it was impossible for him to do so. But this didn't mean that he couldn't do it. Just like how he condensed all of his power to make the pocket watch shake the entire room, he could now condense all of his power to open the door to the analysis of the laws of this world. This world was even more degenerate than the Age of Dharma ending. During the Age of Dharma ending, one could still cultivate and condense power through various means to become a cultivator. However, it was impossible in this world. No living creature, not even Luo Fan, could become a cultivator in this world. Even if he had an infinitely exquisite divine ability that was enough to make any cultivator envious, he still couldn't change this fact. Of course, this was also because his power had not completely disappeared, but was instead sealed and shielded. After all, even when he was at the peak of level 1 pseudo-saint, all his power, cultivation, and even his memories were sealed. Now, he was merely relying on his original memories, an ordinary person's body, and an ordinary person's cultivation realm. How could it be easy for him to break through this restriction and regain his power and cultivation realm? Under such circumstances, what Luo Fan could do was to dig out all the potential in his body. He had to do it in the fastest and most domineering way. Therefore, in this room, he pushed aside many of the furniture, stood in the middle of the room, and took deep breaths in an extremely exquisite way. With every deep breath he took, every part of his body cooperated with each other. With every breath he took, his entire body would undergo some kind of intense movement, causing steam to rise from his body. On the surface of his body, there were many strange black impurities and oil stains that were continuously expelled. After going through all kinds of suppression in this world, his body had already become an ordinary person's body. Naturally, there were many impurities and weaknesses. At this moment, Luo Fan's behavior was actually not too exaggerated. Even a worldly martial arts grandmaster could achieve this through various kinds of hard work, let alone Luo Fan, who now had the memories of a level 1 pseudo-saint peak. If he could not surpass a worldly martial arts grandmaster, wouldn't his countless years of cultivation be for naught? As his body changed, his spirit began to undergo various subtle changes. A sense that surpassed the 5 senses gradually appeared on his body. At the same time, the world in front of him also began to change inexplicably. Everything that was originally hazy and blurry became more and more clear. The dust that covered the void was abandoned. The void that was as empty as a desert, the countless strange electric waves, light waves, electromagnetic waves, made him feel as if he had been thrown into the depths of the ocean, and he almost had difficulty breathing. This kind of experience was in the previous world. He had already gone through it once, so this time, he naturally did not feel anything special. He had already endured it easily. He even narrowed his eyes and caught a hint of something hidden in the depths of the countless strange fluctuations. It was a fundamental change that belonged to the rules and laws. The moment he caught this change, he seemed to be in a trance, as if a huge door had opened in front of him. An inexplicable buoyancy appeared on Luo Fan's body, making him suddenly feel relaxed. The endless electromagnetic waves, radio waves, and light waves around him were instantly isolated. They were instantly isolated, no longer affecting him in the slightest. It's finally done. Luo Fan slowly recovered his normal breathing, and a relaxed smile appeared on his face. Although there were some differences from the previous world, they were still generally the same. He still easily opened the door to analyzing the rules and laws of this world. Although what he had grasped just now was only an extremely shallow and crude kind of rule, this alone was enough. He only needed to follow this extremely shallow and crude set of rules, and naturally, he would be able to submerge his will into the rules and laws. From there, he would begin to analyze the other endless rules and laws, and in the end, he would possess nearly omnipotent power in this world. Right at this moment, the pocket watch not far from Luo Fan trembled slightly. Suddenly, it turned from an inanimate object to a living thing, and a ticking sound came from the pocket watch. Luo Fan's heart moved. He grabbed the pocket watch and realized that the pocket watch had started counting again. This method of counting was still a countdown. Luo Fan calculated slightly and knew that when this countdown reached 0, it would be about 100 years. 100 years? Does this mean that this world will also be destroyed in 100 years? Luo Fan couldn't help but have a strange expression on his face. Could it be that this was the only use of the pocket watch? It was just to remind him how much time he had to work hard to end the process of this world? If that was the case, it might be useful for other cultivators whose memories were blocked at the same time, But for him, it would probably be useless. Secretly wondering about this, Luo Fan put the pocket watch aside and looked around himself. He went to the toilet to tidy himself up. He fixed his hair and beard, took a shower, changed his clothes, and left the room with his pocket watch. Now that he had obtained extraordinary power, although it wasn't much, there was no point in staying in the room. Naturally, he wouldn't stay there anymore. Why don't I unify this world again? The researchers in this world are still very useful. Perhaps they can discover something special about this world and give me some inspiration. With this thought, Luo Fan decided on his first goal in this world. In the previous world, he spent 10 years and really couldn't trigger the test, so he set this goal. But this time, because of his previous experience, he knew that no matter how much he wandered around, it was impossible for him to trigger the test of this world. The previous world had directly targeted this world, so there was no reason for this world to be so petty as to be inferior to the previous world. After deciding on his goal, Luo Fan naturally started to act. This time, he didn't intend to directly conquer America and then start a world war to unify the world like last time. This time, he planned to directly start from the United Nations. The United Nations was originally just an organization that wrangled. It was impossible for it to have the power to unify the world. If there was no Luo Fan, this organization would most likely be disbanded at any time. But with Luo Fan, the situation was different. The headquarters of the United Nations, it was in America, and that place was extremely far for ordinary people. Unless they had a special job or family background, ordinary people like Luo Fan wanted to go there. It was quite difficult. Fortunately, Luo Fan had extraordinary powers and unimaginably terrifying memories. After using a few small tricks, he was already standing in front of the headquarters of the United Nations after a day. There was usually an office here, but compared to the time when a general meeting was held, it was much more deserted. You guys are lucky. Luo Fan looked at the building, shook his head, sighed, and directly walked in. Although it was only a day, for Luo Fan, who had opened the door to the analysis of the laws of this world, it was enough for him to analyze the laws of this world to a quite deep level. And with such an analysis, his current extraordinary powers were already strong beyond the imagination of all ordinary people. He just walked into this building casually. 10 minutes later, the Secretary-General of the United Nations issued an order to convene the United Nations General Assembly. And along with this order, there were countless extraordinary powers transmitted through this order into the minds of the heads of all the countries participating in the United Nations, instantly distorting the wills of the heads of those countries. They were all extremely cooperative. They even directly came to the headquarters of the United Nations to participate in this meeting as the heads of the world. And in the meeting, an extremely incredible economic resolution and political resolution to promote the integration of the world was reached at an unimaginable speed. Then, in the following month, countless conflicts broke out in various countries throughout the world, and even many wars broke out. And the origin of the wars. It was these resolutions. Although the heads of those countries all had great power, after all, it was impossible for all of them to completely control the power of the whole country. After all, the power of the vast majority of people was restricted. And this kind of restriction was usually not obvious. But when these leaders unknowingly reached many agreements that would damage the interests of their countries, and even cause their countries to soon cease to exist, this restriction would erupt with amazing power. Externally, conflicts and wars broke out among those countries. And the result was obvious. Under the control of Luo Fan's extraordinary powers, the victory would, of course, only be these leaders or the legitimate rulers of those countries. And so on. 3 months later, at the cost of losing 1% of the entire world's population, the United Nations unified the entire world. And Luo Fan became the world's first president, or rather, the planet's first president. Moreover, he had absolute authority, and did not even have a fixed term of office. The number of deaths is more than 100 times less than in the previous world. It seems that I really need to be more tactful. Luo Fan stood on the roof of a newly built president's residence, overlooking the world that had become something in his palm, and could not help but show a faint smile on his face. This process of using a little extraordinary power to control the entire world was quite novel and interesting to him. Of course, it could be imagined that this would only happen a few times at the beginning. If it happened a few more times, he might get tired of it. Next, it's time to promote extraordinary powers, he thought after watching for a while. After 3 months, his analysis of the rules and principles of this world had long reached the pinnacle of the previous world. In other words, he had reached a state where he was almost omnipotent in this world. At such a level, no ordinary person in this world could compare to him even if they were given millions of years. With that, it was clear that it was time to strengthen the power of this world, and to raise its research standard. Still can't avoid this process, Luo Fan thought, and could not help but sigh again. After all, he had already conducted in-depth research on the rules and principles of this world over the past few months, and the temporal rules that had appeared in the previous world were of utmost importance to him. In the end, however, he was very disappointed. He could not find any abnormalities at all, and the temporal rules of this world did not have any abnormalities at all. Although he could clearly sense that the flow of time in this world was faster than the outside world, it was a normal speed, and the acceleration was even more stable than when he used the ability to accelerate time himself. There were no signs of the world collapsing at all. It was precisely because he could not find any abnormalities in that world that Luo Fan needed the help of the researchers of this world, their inspiration, and their research methods to find abnormalities in this world. It was just like the previous world. If he wanted to borrow their strength, he would first have to give them strength. If he wanted to borrow their inspiration, he would have to give them knowledge that would inspire them. That was why Luo Fan could only continue the process he had carried out in the previous world, and spread extraordinary powers so that the ordinary people of this world could grasp them as soon as possible. Only then would he be able to obtain what he needed after a certain period of time, just like in the previous world. After sighing, Luo Fan began to issue orders one after another. Chapter 1287. This time, it only took 4 years, but the technological level of the entire world was comparable to the achievements of the previous world in 10 years. During this period, with the help of Luo Fan's extraordinary power, all kinds of information about extraordinary power had been spread out in just 1 year, and everyone in the world was familiar with it. After that, in another year, the combination of extraordinary power and technology had deepened to a level that was close to changing the foundation of science and technology. In the remaining 2 years, the entire world would be transformed. Only then would it be time for the entire world to become like the previous world 10 years later. However, it was a pity that although the development and construction could be sped up, the progress of the world's research could not be sped up too much because of this. After all, this kind of thing required the accumulation of time, the inspiration of many researchers, and their hard work. All the technological level was only the foundation of the research and inspiration. Obviously, the foundation alone was not enough. Therefore, even though this world had completed the transformation of the entire world in the past 4 years, and countless space stations had been built in space, and many experts who could use extraordinary power had been produced. However, there was still no news that Luo Fan wanted. In the past 4 years, apart from helping this world develop, Luo Fan had devoted all his attention to the laws of this world, to the analysis of the laws of this world, and to the study of all possible anomalies in this world. However, when he stepped into the other world, he knew that the anomaly was in this world, but he still could not find the source after spending 100 years. In this world, he did not even know what the anomaly was. How could 4 years be enough to find the source of the anomaly? Therefore, All Luo Fan could do now was to study while waiting. Of course, although he could not find the source of the anomaly, he was still analyzing the laws of this world. After 4 years of analysis, his grasp of the laws and principles of this world had already reached an unimaginable level. In such a deep understanding, he had already reached the realm of omnipotence in this world. What exactly is the anomaly? Luo Fan floated in space and looked at the pocket watch in his hand with a troubled expression. The pocket watch in his hand was the remnant of the last moment of the previous world after it shattered. The scale on it. It was counting down in an irresistible way. After 4 years, the countdown had been shortened by more than 4 years compared to before. Obviously, it was just as Luo Fan had guessed. When the countdown reached 0, it would be the time of the world's destruction. In the face of such urging, Luo Fan's heart did not fluctuate too much. The previous world. He didn't know anything, but he was able to solve all the problems within 100 years. In this world, he had the pocket watch to remind him constantly, and with his previous experience, he didn't think that his performance would be any worse than in the previous world. Moreover, the most important thing was that his attitude towards the test was that it didn't matter if there was a better result or not. This kind of mentality. It was enough for him to be mentally prepared for the worst-case scenario. Of course, he wouldn't have too many emotional fluctuations just because he was stuck in this world. Perhaps I can increase the intensity of the research. As Luo Fan thought so, he immediately issued a series of orders through the extraordinary power. Because the technological foundation of this world had already been deeply integrated with the extraordinary power in the past 4 years, it was naturally an extremely easy thing to analyze the information contained in the extraordinary power. The orders that Luo Fan issued were quickly transmitted to the entire world. At that moment, the entire world was activated. Everyone in this world could clearly see the changes that had taken place in the past 4 years, and they all understood who was the one who had brought about these changes. They understood how important the role Luo Fan played in this. Therefore, the entire world had long since worshipped the current Luo Fan to the extreme, and even regarded him as a savior and a supreme god. His status was even higher than that of the previous world. Such fanatical worship. In fact, it had even reached the level of faith. If it weren't for the fact that the laws of this world did not support the emergence of things such as faith to become a god, perhaps with the faith alone, Luo Fan would have been able to become a supreme god and directly control the entire world. Based on Luo Fan's mentality, his orders would definitely be carried out in the most resolute manner. Everyone in the entire world, who had a little bit of research ability, began to study this world according to the direction that Luo Fan pointed out, and began to work hard to find the abnormalities of this world. The potential of humans was so huge that it was beyond imagination. How powerful was the combined force of billions of people? This was beyond the imagination of all living creatures. Even Luo Fan could not help but secretly exclaim after seeing it. It was naturally not an easy task to study the results that Luo Fan wanted. However, with the combined force of billions of people, countless research results were invented almost every day. Some of these research results were practical, and some were flashy, but they all had one thing in common, and that was that they were magical. It was so magical that if someone said that such a thing existed a few years ago, that person would be regarded as a madman and a madman. Even science fiction authors didn't dare to write about these things. With the accumulation of such many results, the entire world began a new round of transition. Almost every day, every hour, the appearance of the entire world would undergo some changes. In just a short period of 10 years, the results of the previous world that had taken 100 years had actually been surpassed by this world. Time machines, cultivation devices that could accelerate time, learning devices, machines that would immediately produce offspring of 2 people after they entered, and the offspring would immediately grow up to become adults, and so on and so forth. making the entire world almost comparable to the powerful technological countries that Luo Fan had seen in the technological universe. In these 10 years, the results that Luo Fan needed, the abnormalities of this world, had gradually appeared. It's actually space. Luo Fan looked at the report submitted by the researchers. A look of surprise appeared on his face. The report was the size of an A4 paper, but its thickness was comparable to that of a thick Chinese dictionary. There were many esoteric nouns and verbs used in the report to describe a fact. The space of this world was shrinking. This kind of contraction was not a simple one. It was not the contraction of the external space, it was the contraction of all space. This included the internal space of the human body. In other words, in the process of the contraction of space, all matter, including the human body, it was also contracting at the same time. It was precisely because of this that no one, not even Luo Fan, could discover this fact under normal circumstances. Moreover, the rate of contraction was getting faster and faster, and it was getting more and more obvious, getting bigger and bigger. According to this trend, in another 80 years, the entire world would shrink to its limit. Everything in this world would be completely destroyed, completely withered, and eventually turned into nothingness. In other words, in another 80 years, that would be the end of the world. Although Luo Fan had not thought of the problem with the space of this world beforehand, when this change occurred, he had a sudden realization. In the previous world, there was a problem with time. So in this world, if there was no problem with time, then the most likely thing to have a problem was space. Since he had found out that the problem was space, Luo Fan naturally would not waste any more time. He casually slapped the report. This time, the tens of billions of people in this world, after development, the population had increased tenfold. The results of more than 10 years of hard work were instantly turned into nothingness. As for him, he began to analyze and search for the laws of this world directly in space. The law layer. It was an extremely wonderful and incredible existence. It was on the same level as space, time, matter, energy, and other real existences. However, in the law layer, it was possible to find the corresponding laws or laws of all other tangible and intangible abstract existences. For example, there was the law of time corresponding to time. There was also the law of a certain abstract phenomenon corresponding to that phenomenon. These laws or laws that corresponded to real existences were not those real existences, but they had the power to define and change real existences. For example, by changing the law of time, one could change time within a certain range, speed up, decelerate, or even distort, reverse, or pause time within a certain range similar to this. Other laws and laws also had similar characteristics. They could also change the corresponding facts, redefine them, and analyze them anew. Of course, this effect was one-sided. The changes in laws and laws could affect real existences. However, this did not mean that all the changes in real things would be completely reflected in the laws and laws. For example, if Luo Fan was at his peak, he could easily change time, but this change would be directed at time itself. In that case, it would not cause the changes in the law of time. The other facts were similar to this. Because of this characteristic of laws and laws, Luo Fan very quickly found the corresponding law of space in the law layer. The law of space. After all, he had already analyzed the law layer very thoroughly over the past 10 years. He was already very clear about where the law of space was and what its characteristics were. Now that he found it, it was equivalent to retrieving his memory. With a grab, a law of space appeared in Luo Fan's hand. What kind of mysterious change is this? I can't even sense it. Luo Fan looked at the law of space, which did not seem to have any abnormalities, and could not help but sigh in admiration. Laws were invisible, colorless, and immaterial existences. They lay in Luo Fan's hand as if there was nothing there. However, it was the law of space after all, and its existence caused the surrounding space to change slightly. Vaguely, even Luo Fan, who was holding the law, seemed to become a little illusory, as if he was in a completely different world and space. Using the method he had used to deal with the abnormality of time to deal with this world clearly would not work. Time and space were two existences of the same level, but this did not mean that there was no difference between the two. In fact, it was the opposite. The difference between the two was extremely huge. Compared to time, space had a stronger geographical characteristic. The destruction of a section of time could cause the collapse of the entire world. It could cause the destruction of the entire world. But for space, unless more than half of the world could be directly destroyed, the world would soon be able to repair the broken space. In other words, at this very moment, Luo Fan had shrunk this section of the law of space to the extent that it caused the destruction of space, but it could only affect the surrounding space within a certain range. Soon, the entire world's space-time would naturally repair this section of space, and it would not directly cause a collapse like the last time. It would cause the entire world to directly go to the end of the world. However, although he knew that this method would not work, but Luo Fan would not be stingy with it. What was the harm in giving it a try? If it did not work, then forget it. If it worked, wouldn't he have made a huge profit? With this thought in mind, he rubbed his hand, and this section of the law of space suddenly shrunk. In an instant, the extent of its shrinkage was so huge that it exceeded the limit of the world. Faintly, a loud cracking sound echoed in Luo Fan's ears. Then, in front of him, the space suddenly began to shatter in the form of a vortex. This was a vortex. With Luo Fan's palm as the center, small spatial cracks formed concentric circles around him and continued to spread. These cracks grew larger and more obvious, and finally directly tore open the space, revealing an invisible void. The space within a range of hundreds of miles was completely destroyed. Countless small, strip-shaped spatial fragments. They spread throughout this range of hundreds of miles. Although Luo Fan's body had been tempered for more than 10 years and was already dozens of times stronger than the body of an ordinary person, it was still the body of an ordinary person after all. Compared to his real body, it was billions of times weaker. If it was directly exposed to this spatial fragment, it would definitely be destroyed. If he was directly exposed to these spatial fragments, what awaited him would be to completely turn into countless tiny fragments and be completely annihilated. Therefore, at this moment, with his in-depth analysis of the laws of this world, Luo Fan instantly condensed a powerful extraordinary power to directly envelop him, so that his body would not be injured in the slightest under the shroud of these spatial cracks. However, the moment he used his extraordinary power, he knew that his previous guess was correct. It was impossible to destroy this world by shrinking the laws of space to the limit, because if the world was destroyed, he would not be able to condense extraordinary power in this world at all, and he would not be able to protect himself. Of course, at that time, he would have passed the test and naturally would not need to protect himself anymore. Sure enough, right in front of him, the entire world trembled slightly. Then, the countless tiny spatial fragments gradually began to fuse, and in a short while, they formed an incomparably complete, empty space that looked no different from before. Luo Fan casually made a grabbing motion, and the laws of space that were hidden in the depths of the laws of space returned to his hand. Although this section of the laws of space was of the same type as the previous section of the laws of space, it felt completely different. It was a little unfamiliar, but also a little strange, new aura. At a glance, one could tell that this section of the laws of space had just been born. Looking at this section of the laws of space, Luo Fan did not know what to do for a moment. Normally speaking, it was easier to master the laws of space than the laws of time. For some cultivators who cultivated laws and grasped laws as their cultivation method, they would usually first master the laws of space, and through continuous in-depth understanding, they would finally try to master the laws of time. The difference in difficulty between the two could be said to be 1 to 100. However, in comparison, destroying the entire world through the destruction of space was much more difficult than destroying the entire world through the destruction of time. The difference between this kind of understanding and destruction vaguely contained some kind of strange balance, which made one feel emotional about the mysteries of the universe. If Luo Fan wanted to destroy this world now, it would actually be very simple for him to destroy time. However, even if he did not know what the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure was testing him on, he also knew that using the method of destroying time to destroy this world could not be considered as passing this world's test at all. After all, the abnormality of this world happened in space. If he were to set up a test, since he had shown the abnormality, of course the person being tested would have to respond to this abnormality in the way that he wanted to see, and not directly destroy the world through other methods. That would be no different from flipping the chessboard during a game of chess. He could even predict that if he destroyed this world through the method of destroying time, not only would he not be able to obtain the gains from the previous destruction of the world, but he might even be injured because of this destruction. If it was a little more serious, it might even arouse the dissatisfaction of the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. By then, the other party would attack him, and he would not be able to bear the consequences. What should I do? Luo Fan casually rubbed the law of space. Looking at the changes of the law of space, which suddenly distorted, suddenly deformed, suddenly expanded, suddenly contracted, and suddenly formed a closed space, Luo Fan felt a headache. Chapter 1288. After more than half a year of careful consideration, Luo Fan finally came up with a solution. In order to destroy this world with the change of space, one could not simply follow the previous world and accelerate the change according to the trend of the abnormal change of space in this world. Instead, one could use another method to reverse this change. Then, these two changes would produce an incomparably intense conflict, and through this conflict, the rules and laws of this world would be completely torn apart, and this world would be completely destroyed. Such a method might or might not be suitable for the requirements of the previous world's trial. Whatever the case may be, it was the method with the greatest chance of success at the moment. Therefore, once Luo Fan came up with that method, he decided to act. After all, he would not suffer too great a loss even if he failed this time. To reverse the change, he would have to inflate space. And it would be an expansion that would accelerate the contraction of the world's space. This kind of thing, I can ask those researchers for help. Luo Fan thought to himself. He lifted his foot and took a light step. Under the effect of his extraordinary power, his figure directly penetrated the distant space, and directly arrived at the most important place in the center of this world, his residence. Upon arriving, he directly issued a command to every researcher in this world with his extraordinary power, instructing them to create a device that would incessantly inflate the world's space according to his concept. To Luo Fan, it was all too simple to design such a device. After all, the depth of his analysis of the laws had long since surpassed all living beings in this world. With his level of analysis, he could design a device that could work against the laws of space. How difficult would that be? For the researchers, Luo Fan's command was a fabled holy voice, a revelation from their savior, a being that brought them boundless hope. Furthermore, Luo Fan's command was, as the researchers understood it, a command that was completely directed at the problem the world was facing. It was a response that could prevent the world from heading towards Armageddon. Under such circumstances they had truly burst out with all their power and inspiration, and in a brief decade, they had set up the device that Luo Fan had designed across the world, not just on the surface of that planet, but the entire solar system that existed in this world. Such a project, before Luo Fan appeared, even if the entire world used up all its power and spent tens of thousands of years, it would still be impossible. But now it only took a short 10 years. These devices, they were shaped like balls. Each of them looked like a crystal ball, with spots of light flowing within them, and there seemed to be countless stars shining within them. These spheres floated in the universe and looked like tiny stars. The entire world seemed to have changed, and the creatures living on the surface of the planet seemed to have completely changed. All of a sudden, he felt as if the whole world had become so wonderful and mysterious. It was even to the extent that he felt an indescribable sense of hope. However, they did not know that such a change would accelerate the destruction of the entire world. It would accelerate the arrival of the end of the world. As mortals, even those researchers with superior intelligence were far worse than Luo Fan in terms of their analysis and understanding of the laws and principles. Using the opposite change to stop a specific change was naturally the truth when it came to macroscopic and common things. However, they applied the truth of macroscopic and common things to microscopic, even abstract and invisible laws of space. That was a huge fallacy. They did not know that such a method could not stop the contraction of space at all. Such a method would only cause an extremely tragic conflict between the contraction of space and the expansion of space that they had caused. Subsequently, the laws of space of the entire world would be completely destroyed, and the entire world would be completely destroyed, causing the end of the world to arrive more than 80 years earlier than usual. Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about what they would do. Destroying a world was not much pressure for him. After all, he could open up a world and create living beings at will. Because he could open up a world and create living beings, to him the world was like an ordinary painter to his own painting. Why would he feel any pressure when he destroyed it? Because there was no pressure, Luo Fan did not care about how many living beings this method would cause or how tragic the consequences would be. He only watched coldly as the living beings of this world used their own inspiration and their own efforts to push this world into the abyss of destruction, causing the end of the world to arrive faster and faster. On this day, a researcher came. After kowtowing to Luo Fan, he said enthusiastically, reporting to Planet Leader, "Everything is ready. We can start at any time." Luo Fan looked at the enthusiastic researcher, nodded and said, "Then let's wait for 3 days before we start. If we succeed, the world will be saved. However, if we fail, the world may be destroyed. In these 3 days you should go talk to your families." The researcher became even more enthusiastic when he heard that. He said, "Thank you for your understanding, Planet Leader. However, all of us agree that this plan will definitely succeed. The world will definitely be saved because of this." Luo Fan only shook his head when he heard that. One look at the researcher and he knew that what he said was indeed based on their own research and deduction. However, more than that, it was a protagonist's mentality supporting it. Many people would occasionally have such thought. Why am I me? Why am I this identity now? Why am I in this position in this world? What is the deeper meaning behind this? What will the world be like after I die? What will the world be like when I was alive? These kinds of thoughts could be said to be the ultimate question of human philosophy. However, for individuals there would only be one conclusion in the end. That is, I am the most special person. I am the protagonist of this world. The reason why I have my current identity, the reason why I am who I am, must be because of some mysterious force. I must have a special mission. The world when I was alive must have been empty. After I die, I will definitely go to another place. Perhaps I will be reincarnated. Perhaps I'll enter another world, or even reincarnate. In short, my consciousness will never disappear. These kinds of thoughts were the protagonist's mentality. Obviously, this mentality was for most people. This was true for most people. At least, this researcher in front of him and the vast majority of researchers in this world had this mentality. It was precisely because of this mentality. They would think that because this was their world, it was impossible for this world to be destroyed. In this world, no matter what seemed to be invincible, there was a dangerous existence that could not be stopped by any means. In the end, they would definitely be able to think of a way to avoid this kind of destruction. In the end, they would definitely be able to make this world continue to exist. In particular, at this time, they had even found a way that seemed to be able to prevent the complete destruction of this world from any point of view. This kind of mentality was, of course, extremely ridiculous for Luo Fan. However, he did not have the idea to wake them up. Perhaps this kind of mentality would allow them to walk more safely at the last moment. Therefore, he smiled faintly and said, "Perhaps. But I'd better pass on this arrangement. Maybe some people don't think so." The researcher still wanted to say something, but Luo Fan was too lazy to care anymore. With a wave of his hand, an extraordinary power sent him out. In the next 3 days, he did not plan to do anything. Just as he said, these 3 days were for the many living beings in this world to spend time with his family. It was also the last kindness he left for this world. As for whether others would accept his kindness or not, it was not up to him to decide. With a light step, he used the extraordinary power and arrived in space in the blink of an eye. With a wave of his hand, a majestic temple appeared around him. This temple was extremely huge. Even in the middle of the sun, it was quite obvious. From the surface of the planet, it was almost like there was an extra moon in the sky. Luo Fan stood quietly in the temple and raised his hand to take out the pocket watch. Compared to back then, the number of cracks on this pocket watch had not increased. Other than the difference in the scale, everything else was exactly the same. There are still more than 80 years. Luo Fan looked at the pocket watch and sighed. He put it away. During these 3 days, the entire world fell into a kind of peace. However, under this peace there was a sense of oppression. Although everyone felt that this world would not be destroyed, there was danger after all. However, it was still dangerous. Hence, they treasured these 3 days. Moreover, it was also because of that worry that they were unable to act as usual even if they tried their best to act as if nothing had happened during these 3 days. Because of this, there was a sense of oppression amidst the peace. Luo Fan did not give them too much time. When the 3 days were up, he did not give them a second more. He raised his hand and directly activated the spherical equipment that covered the entire world. At this moment, all the spatial laws in the entire law layer were extracted and attached to these spheres. The number of spheres could be counted in the trillions. Such a huge amount of equipment was distributed all over the world, and the density was quite high. This extraction process allowed all the spatial laws in the entire world to be extracted. After these spheres extracted the law of space, they suddenly injected some strange existence into the law of space. This strange existence was invisible and intangible. It was not energy, nor was it intangible. Instead, it was an extremely abstract existence that was similar to space. This existence was extremely profound and mysterious. It was almost the highest achievement of this world's science and technology. Apart from Luo Fan's design, the reason why it had appeared was because all living beings had faith in Luo Fan and their desire to survive. With the injection of this strange existence, the spatial laws started to strengthen and extend continuously. As the spatial laws strengthened and extended, it felt like space was expanding. It enveloped all the living beings in this world, so that all the existences in this world knew about it. The space of the entire world was changing. This change was so intense that everyone could sense that it was completely different from the shrinking space of the world itself. This difference made all the living beings in the entire world feel a strong sense of hope in an instant. It made them feel that the disappearance of the end of the world was almost certain. At this moment, an invisible wave swept through the entire world. Amidst this formless fluctuation, everyone heard a loud shattering sound. As this shattering sound rang out, tiny cracks started to appear in this world. These cracks spread all over the world. They covered the bodies of all living beings inside and out, and they covered everything that the eyes of all living beings could see. These cracks were so densely packed, and the speed at which they were changing was so fast that in the blink of an eye, they had already expanded thousands of times and completely ripped apart the space of the entire world. This caused the entire world to be completely fragmented. As all the space of this world was fragmented, the law layer of this world was also completely torn apart. Time matter. All the energies were at the same time. Collapse and destruction. Sure enough, Luo Fan looked at the destroyed world and felt the countless fragments treating him as an existence of nothingness, not having any effect on him at all. He couldn't help but reveal a faint smile on his face. This change meant that this method of destroying the world was indeed recognized by the level 9 pseudosage treasure. In other words, by destroying the world like this, he had passed another test. The speed at which the entire world was destroyed was getting faster and faster, and at the same time, it was becoming more and more thorough. After a while, it had completely disappeared without a trace. Luo Fan then returned to the indescribable space of color and character before he entered this world. Then, behind the countless fragments of the world, a copper ruler slowly floated into Luo Fan's hand. The copper ruler was extremely heavy, and there were also countless cracks on it. However, compared to the pocket watch that seemed to be on the verge of collapsing at any time, the cracks on the copper ruler were almost negligible. The pocket watch represents time, and the copper ruler represents space? Luo Fan held the copper ruler and suddenly felt that his strength and cultivation had recovered a lot. Moreover, compared to the time when he only obtained the pocket watch, the strength and cultivation that he had recovered were more than 100 times stronger. I didn't expect you to obtain 2 test certificate. Seems like I've gained quite a lot. At this moment, a voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Then, a huge mysterious force appeared out of nowhere and attacked Luo Fan quickly. Although the strength of this force was weaker than Luo Fan's, it was exquisite and unpredictable. The changes contained within it were extremely profound, as if every bit of the force contained principles that Luo Fan couldn't understand and comprehend. This is at least a level 6 false sage. It's just that his strength hasn't recovered to my level. In an instant, Luo Fan made a judgment. His reaction was extremely fast. He abruptly raised the ruler that he had just obtained in his hand, and with a slight stroke, a strange barrier appeared around him. In an instant, the force was completely blocked outside the barrier. There was a loud bang. Although the force was extremely weak to Luo Fan, the mysteries contained within it were so profound that even he could not understand it. It directly collided with the barrier and instantly produced an astonishing explosion. It even caused the entire world to tremble slightly, as if even the world could not withstand the aftermath of the impact of the barrier and the force. Although the amount of the force was weaker than the power that Luo Fan currently possessed, it was still at the quasi-sage level after all. Although a quasi-saint could not withstand a single blow from an existence like Luo Fan, they were still extremely powerful. If they were to completely erupt with their power, it would be extremely easy for them to shake a great thousand world. Not to mention that the power of a sage-to-be was in the hands of a pseudo-sage-to-be, who was at least a level 6 sage-to-be. Of course, its power was even more powerful and terrifying. It was obviously not surprising that it could cause such a commotion. Luo Fan turned his head and saw a middle-aged cultivator floating in the distance. The middle-aged cultivator was holding something that looked like a tortoise shell in his hand. The cracks on the tortoise shell were also densely packed, and they were even denser and larger than the cracks on the pocket watch that Luo Fan had obtained for the first time. It looked as if the tortoise shell had been completely broken into pieces and then glued together. It made people wonder whether the person holding the tortoise shell had consumed a lot of strength to maintain the tortoise shell intact. At this moment, the middle-aged man had a look of surprise on his face. Obviously, he was extremely surprised that Luo Fan could easily defend against his sneak attack with the help of the copper ruler. It seems that the so-called test certificate can be snatched. Thank you for reminding me. Luo Fan looked at the person and smiled. He didn't think that he was the only one who could preserve his memory in the memory seal of the level 9 false sage. Since he could do it, there must be many people who were stronger than him who could do it. Therefore, he wasn't surprised that someone else could appear here and obtain a similar test certificate at this time. What surprised him was that the person actually tried to snatch his test certificate the moment he obtained the first test certificate. This obviously meant that the person must know more about the test than him. Chapter 1289. Under such circumstances, there was no way Luo Fan would be polite to this middle-aged man. Before the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure made a move, he raised the copper ruler in his hand and pointed it at the middle-aged man. In an instant, an invisible spatial fluctuation was produced, and the space around the middle-aged man was completely sealed. An invisible, square-shaped cage trapped the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly. He was also a level 5 pseudo-sage. Although most of his strength had been sealed, and he had only recovered a little, he still had his eyesight. The moment this invisible cage appeared, he felt its existence and instantly knew that this was not an ordinary space cage. This was a space cage formed by an unimaginably powerful space that was even more stable than the space of the demon realm. Even if he was at his peak and his strength had not suffered any damage, it might still be very difficult and exhausting for him to deal with this cage. The time it would take would not be something that could be completed in just a few breaths' time. Not to mention the fact that the strength he had regained was trillions of times weaker than his true strength. With such strength, it would be impossible for him to break out of this spatial cage, let alone anything else. Seeing this, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat, and he pointed at the pocket watch in his hand. In an instant, the needle on the pocket watch moved slightly. After an extremely short period of time, it began to return to 0 quickly. In the blink of an eye, it had gone from that scale to 0. At the instant the scale returned to 0, the middle-aged man in the space cage felt the time in the space cage he was in suddenly start to collapse. As time collapsed, all the other rules and laws, as well as all the space and matter inside the cage, collapsed as well. All the energy. This kind of collapse was so terrifying that it made him feel like his life was in extreme danger. This danger was so intense and obvious that it made his heart tremble, and his body could not help but tremble slightly. Fortunately, he was a level 6 pseudo-sage existence after all. His reaction speed was quite fast. With a toss of the orbit in his hand, a layer of illusory tortoiseshell spherical cover instantly enveloped him. This invisible cover was made up of pure energy, and the energy inside was connected to each other in an extremely mysterious way, forming a mysterious whole. It instantly defended against all the energy changes in the outside world, and even all the changes in spacetime and laws of nature. Using its own energy, Guang Guang formed a place within the light barrier that could allow living beings to survive. It was a place where there was no time, no space, no rules, no matter, but only energy that could support the existence of living beings. In an instant, Luo Fan, when he sensed the changes within the space cage, his expression involuntarily changed. As expected, this person is very clear about this test. This kind of use of the test proof is definitely not something that a first-timer would be able to do. Could it be that this person participated in the Buddha's test? This thought flashed through his mind. He couldn't help but feel terrified. For ordinary beings, 100 years was a very long time. 1,000 years was equivalent to the passing of several dynasties. 10,000 years was an unimaginably long time. What kind of concept was 10 trillion years? That was a time that would not be used up even if the chaos was destroyed countless times. However, for cultivators, especially pseudo-sage cultivators, 10 trillion years was only a relatively long period of time. This was how long Luo Fan had cultivated to this day. In terms of the time he had experienced, it was far more than 10 trillion years. He wouldn't be surprised at all if this level 6 pseudosage could live from 10 trillion years ago to the present. It seems that the level 7 pseudosage is the most powerful. However, he might not be the most well-hidden one among the people present. At this time, among the dozens of people, how many of them are like this, completely hiding everything about themselves, pretending to be completely unaware of this test? Luo Fan's heart turned, and then he thought again. This thought made his originally relaxed mood tense up again. This test could actually make a pseudo-sage existence spend 10 trillion years planning and waiting. This test was probably not simple. It might really give someone a chance to become a sage directly using energy to construct an existence that could replace time, space, laws, and matter. This degree of utilization was many times stronger than Luo Fan's use of time and space. If Luo Fan could use space and time as deeply as he did just now, he would be able to subdue this middle-aged man with just one of them. He wouldn't be like this, where he couldn't defeat this middle-aged man even after using 2 of them. At this moment, Luo Fan's space cage suddenly collapsed. Then, his control over the time in the space cage disappeared completely. An invisible force acted on his body. This existence was vast and boundless. It was extremely profound, to the point that even Luo Fan found it hard to understand. Then, he felt that the little bit of power and cultivation that he had just recovered was once again sealed and shielded. Then, he felt that his memories were gradually disappearing. At this moment, he understood that this was another test. He couldn't care about anything else. In an instant, he used the first level of the law of cause and effect billions of times and patted his head with one hand. Finally, at the last moment, he retained his memories. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but during this process, he felt that his precise use of the law of cause and effect seemed to have become more perfect. The power that he used seemed to be much stronger than before. At this moment, the expression of the middle-aged man opposite him changed drastically. His eyes turned from blank to ferocious, and then from ferocious to blank. After this, he was locked in an inexplicable fatigue. When Luo Fan saw this, a strange suction directly acted on his body, wrapping him and throwing him towards a world that existed in this world. Just when Luo Fan thought that the situation would be similar to the previous 2 times, he suddenly realized that there seemed to be another figure not far away from him who was also being pulled toward the world that was pulling him. The same world? Does this mean that we should continue to settle our disputes in that world, or that we must kill everyone in the end and leave only one alive? Luo Fan was surprised. His vision darkened. Then, light shone and he could see the outside world again. He saw that this world was no longer the same as the world that he had experienced before. Everything in this world was extremely unfamiliar to his memories. But he was in a trance. He felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity with everything in this world. The place where he appeared was a grassland. Here, the sky was blue and the ground was green. It was a scenery that stretched as far as the eye could see. Only in the extremely far distance, faint shadows of mountains could be seen. Grassland. Luo Fan looked at the grassland with a puzzled expression. He felt his own power. He found that he was still an ordinary person like in the previous 2 worlds. What he could rely on was still the transcendent being memories that he had accumulated over trillions of years of cultivation. It seems that there is a city in that direction. Luo Fan followed the feeling that came from his body and pointed in a direction. He couldn't help but reveal a slight smile on his face. No matter what kind of world this was, he was very interested in obtaining power in such a world. He was no longer unfamiliar with it. No matter why the level 9 pseudosage treasure threw the middle-aged man into this world together with him, whether it was a competition, to resolve hatred, or to ensure that one of them would die, he didn't think that he would fail. In a situation where this world was completely unfamiliar, Luo Fan would not immediately join the human society of this world. The first thing he had to do was to regain his power and obtain enough transcendent power in this world. to obtain transcendent power. The first step, of course, could only be unearthed from his own body. Therefore, Luo Fan carefully observed his own body and sensed his own body. This body was different from the body he had in the previous two worlds. In contrast, this body was much stronger. Although it didn't have any special abilities, it was surprisingly strong. It had the foundation to obtain power beyond the ordinary. This also meant that this world itself might be a world that could cultivate. The reason why this body was not endowed with that kind of power should be because the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure wanted him to start from scratch. He felt this. However, Luo Fan was overjoyed. This saved him a lot of trouble. At least, it would allow him to obtain transcendent power faster. After all, to analyze the laws of this world with the body of an ordinary person was equivalent to an ordinary person finding the end of the universe with his own eyes. It might even be more complicated and difficult than this. Now that he had the foundation to cultivate, it was equivalent to obtaining a spaceship that could fly at will. In this way, it would be much easier to find the end of the universe. With a thought, Luo Fan closed his eyes and slowly adjusted his breathing so that his body could relax as much as possible. The beginning of all cultivation was to unearth the power of the human body. Only by unearthing and fully mastering one's own power could one seek to master the power of the outside world. Therefore, even though he knew that he could cultivate in this world, Luo Fan could only rely on himself to obtain the cultivation method of this world with only his memories, power, and cultivation. Through the adjustment of his breathing, he gradually felt that there was a strange invisible existence in his lower abdomen that was beating slightly. This beating was like the beating of a heart. At first, it was extremely weak, but the more it went on, the stronger and more obvious the beating became. In the end, after dozens of breaths, the beating finally broke through the limit, as if a barrier had been torn apart. It instantly tore apart the barrier between Luo Fan and his body, allowing him to clearly see all the details inside his body and obtain the ability to look inside. At the same time, the thing that was beating in his lower abdomen was also revealed. It was an egg, an invisible egg, an egg that was incubating and something was coming out of it. Cracking sounds continuously entered his ears. The eggshell on the surface of the egg continued to shatter and fall, revealing a glowing figure. A glowing figure walked out of the eggshell. After this figure came out, he picked up the eggshells and kept stuffing them into his mouth. In the blink of an eye, he had eaten all the eggshells. After eating all the eggshells, the figure let out a roar to the sky. As the light shone, it began to expand continuously. In the blink of an eye, it broke through his lower abdomen, broke through his body, and appeared outside his body. Luo Fan looked over, only to find that it was a human figure, one that looked exactly like him. It was a figure. Or rather, it was not exactly the same as this body, but a figure that looked exactly like the real Luo Fan, the fake sage-level Luo Fan. This figure even had the mysterious and flawless state of Luo Fan's original body. Anyone who saw him would be able to receive endless information that belonged to him. They would be able to feel the endless mysteries that existed in his body. The figure's eyes were closed, and he stood there quietly, wrapping Luo Fan's body within it. This is a kind of martial soul. I didn't expect this world to cultivate this kind of thing. Luo Fan's vision was amazing. After a brief recollection of the whole process, he knew the root of cultivation in this world. This humanoid figure was obviously formed according to the obsession of living beings and the belief of living beings. It was a kind of spiritual body that could carry out some kind of deep communication with the outside world and could exert strength that surpassed the body. This kind of spiritual body had a strong fighting instinct, so it could be called a martial soul. This martial soul could be cultivated. It could be strengthened, and in the end, it could even surpass the limit and break the boundary between life and death. It could be reintegrated with the human body, allowing the person to truly obtain power that surpassed everything and a lifespan that surpassed everything. It has some potential. As Luo Fan thought about this, he raised his hand and grabbed at the void. The martial soul began to produce a powerful suction force, frantically absorbing the endless yuan qi and energy in the entire world. After the yuan qi and energy surged into the martial soul, it underwent some mysterious changes. It triggered the laws of this world, causing the martial soul to become more and more corporeal. Its size also grew larger and larger. After 2 hours, a huge vortex of yuan qi energy had appeared in this place. The size of the martial soul had also grown to a height of tens of thousands of feet. It looked even bigger, more majestic, and more terrifying than a mountain. After reaching this level, the martial soul continued to absorb yuan qi, but it no longer expanded. Instead, it began to gradually shrink and shrink. At the same time, in the process, it began to gradually fuse with Luo Fan. After another 2 hours, the entire martial soul had completely shrunk to the size of a normal human figure, and it had completely fused with Luo Fan, changing Luo Fan's appearance to that of a peak level 1 pseudo-sage. He had completely shed the body and appearance of an ordinary person that he had been given after entering this world. Even at this time, the endless yuan qi and energy around his body were still surging into his body frantically, constantly enriching his body and increasing his strength. After another 2 hours, there was a soft poof, and Luo Fan suddenly felt that the boundary between him and the world had completely disappeared. There was even no need to analyze it. The laws of this entire world were completely displayed in front of him, allowing him to use and grab at will. At this moment, a powerful and unparalleled pressure suddenly appeared out of thin air. That seemingly endless yuan qi energy that was constantly surging towards him, constantly enriching and increasing his strength, suddenly seemed to reject him, instantly hiding far away. An invisible energy vacuum directly appeared around his body. At this moment, a pitch-black tribulation cloud appeared in the sky. The lightning on it flickered, and every time it surged and shook, Luo Fan felt an indescribable pressure. So there's a tribulation. It came just in time. It saves me the time to break the limit of this world. Luo Fan was elated when he saw the tribulation cloud. Cultivating according to the cultivation system of this world naturally had great benefit. It allowed him to obtain power at the fastest speed and reduce the time he needed to analyze the laws of this world. However, at the same time, this also made him restricted by the limits of this world. He needed to break through the limits of this world in order to be able to perfectly analyze the laws of this world like other world. Just now, what he had spent 6 hours to complete was the limit of this world that countless cultivators in this world could not get close to even after painstakingly cultivating. At that moment, he felt that the boundary between him and the world had completely disappeared. He felt that he no longer needed to analyze the laws of this world to be able to easily come into contact with the laws of this world. This was the manifestation of this limit. Regardless of the cultivation system or the cultivation method, when one reached a certain level, they would definitely reach the same destination by different means. They would definitely come into contact with the source of this world and come into contact with the laws of this world. However, in comparison, some techniques could allow one to break through this level and continue to advance, while some techniques would only reach their limit here. Chapter 1290. The heavenly tribulation continued to condense and thicken in the sky. When it first appeared, it was only a rather dense black cloud, but after a few breaths, it had become so dense that it seemed as if the sky was about to collapse and press down. The strength of the power contained within it had also reached an unimaginable realm. If any ordinary cultivator in this world encountered the heavenly tribulation, they would definitely not be able to survive even if they were as powerful as Luo Fan. In fact, the first wave of change in the tribulation cloud would be enough to wipe them out completely, and all traces of their existence in this world would be completely erased. However, it was a pity that the tribulation cloud encountered Luo Fan. He was a peak level 1 pseudo-sage cultivator, and he also had extremely high attainments in the first level of the law of causality. Any heavenly tribulation in this world, no matter how powerful or terrifying it was, would just be a piece of cake to him. Although Luo Fan knew that he could deal with the heavenly tribulation in an instant, he did not make a move at that moment. Instead, he hovered in the air, looked up at the tribulation cloud, and waited quietly. There were no energy fluctuations coming from his body, and he did not use the laws of this world at all. He was waiting for the power of the tribulation cloud to reach its peak, waiting for the power of the tribulation cloud to reach its most terrifying realm. To him, the tribulation cloud was like a tonic. The stronger the power of the tribulation cloud, the more terrifying the attack of the tribulation cloud, and the more benefits it would bring him. The tribulation cloud did not stop growing. Instead, it continued to grow as if there was no end to it. The power contained within it seemed to be increasing at a crazy rate. Originally, it had only covered a radius of several hundred feet, but in just a short while, it had grown to cover a radius of several dozen miles. It had almost covered the sun in the sky, causing the world within a radius of several dozen miles to seem to have lost all light. It was so dark that one could not even see their own fingers. The pressure that was produced by the tribulation cloud on Luo Fan. It was also many times stronger in the process. If it were not for the fact that Luo Fan had a complete memory and had reached an unimaginable level of control over the laws of the world, it would have been difficult for him to remain unscathed under such pressure. The tribulation cloud grew for nearly a quarter of an hour before it reached its peak. At this moment, the ground within a radius of several dozen kilometers had sunk by several feet due to the pressure. Muffled buzzing sounds rang out from the sky, causing the space to tremble. At this moment, the tribulation cloud's pressure had already reached its peak, and the tribulation cloud's thickness, density, and coverage were no longer increasing. Seeing this, how could Luo Fan hesitate? With a thought, he took a step forward. The laws of this world changed naturally, supporting his body. He left a faint green light in the void and directly drilled into the tribulation clouds in the sky. Throughout the entire process, his posture was incomparably graceful. It was extremely elegant, as if this was the most standard method of traversing the void. None of the other methods were as exquisite as the one he had just used. The instant his figure entered the tribulation cloud, the entire tribulation cloud began to churn violently, and the boundless energy within it began to erupt. In other words, it was pouring madly towards Luo Fan's position. Luo Fan's body seemed to have become a black hole at this moment, producing an indescribably terrifying suction force. He frantically absorbed the terrifying energy that erupted from the tribulation cloud, continuously sucking it into his body, and finally, his body and his martial soul. They were all pushed to a realm that surpassed the limits of this world. Because of this change, the entire tribulation cloud produced an infinitely loud, muffled sound. However, amidst this muffled sound, the tribulation cloud began to gradually shrink. Moreover, its density seemed to be gradually thinning. After more than an hour, the entire tribulation cloud completely disappeared. Luo Fan's figure reappeared in the void. He floated there, and his body was faintly surrounded by a kind of invisible wave. This wave was so condensed that it became a visible form. From afar it looked like there were countless transparent divine dragons coiling around Luo Fan's body. Amidst this wave, Luo Fan's eyes were tightly shut. The aura in his body suddenly rose and suddenly weakened. Sometimes, it even weakened to the point where it was almost zero. After a while, a soft sound rang out in Luo Fan's body. With a pop, the aura on Luo Fan's body grew wildly, and the surrounding wave that was originally condensed to the point where it could be seen with the naked eye was instantly dispersed by this aura. The clouds in the sky were completely broken at this moment, revealing a sky full of stars that could not have been seen during the day. At this moment, even the sun, which emitted boundless light, was overshadowed by Luo Fan, who had no light on his body. In an instant, a feeling of omnipotence, omniscience, and omniscience arose spontaneously. This feeling was different from the feeling when he regained his strength and cultivation, but it was still powerful and unparalleled. Similarly, he could use almost all the magic powers and techniques that his original body possessed. I've finally broken through the limits of heaven and earth. Sure enough, with the help of the original cultivation system of heaven and earth, I can indeed obtain more powerful strength faster than using other methods. Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed at the void. The ground in front of him bulged out of thin air, and the ground shook violently. Soon, a mountain peak that was tens of thousands of meters high was formed. Compared to his original body, this method was slower, but it consumed less power. Naturally, he was blessed by heaven and earth, and could use one part of his strength to achieve 100% of his original strength. After testing his strength, Luo Fan became more and more satisfied. Let's not talk about how to pass this test for now. The most important thing is to get rid of that level 6 pseudosage. Luo Fan thought to himself. With a thought, everything in the world quickly flowed in front of his eyes. Now that he had broken through the limits of this world, it was naturally just a matter of a thought for him to search the entire world. And what he was looking for now was none other than the level 6 pseudosage who had entered this world with him. For him, it didn't matter even if he failed this test, but the level 6 pseudosage was a danger to him. If he was allowed to exist, even if he passed this test and obtained the proof of the existence of this world, he might not be able to get any benefits in the end. He might even end up helping the level 6 pseudosage instead. Moreover, more importantly, the level 6 pseudosage knew so much about this test. If he could subdue him, he would be able to obtain more information about this test. He might even be able to find out how to pass the test as soon as possible. He might even be able to find out what the final opportunity of this test was and how it was used. With all these factors, Luo Fan's choice was, of course, obvious. Nothing. Luo Fan searched the world. He wanted to find the existence of the level 6 pseudosage, but the final result was very strange. He couldn't find the existence of the level 6 pseudosage at all. Even if he set his sights on the tortoiseshell with endless cracks, he still couldn't find it. It was as if the person had never entered this world. Luo Fan was extremely confident in his eyesight and memory. He clearly remembered that the level 6 pseudosage had rushed into this world with him. At this time, of course, he didn't doubt his memory. He instantly knew that this was either the setting of the level 9 pseudosage treasure, and the examinees who entered the same world would never be able to perceive each other before seeing each other with their own eyes, or the level 6 pseudosage had found a way to hide from his detection. No matter which possibility it was definitely not good news for Luo Fan. He could obtain power that surpassed the limits of this world in such a short time. In that case, even if the level 6 pseudosage was weaker than him, it wouldn't be too far off. In other words, now was the time that he was most likely to get rid of the level 6 pseudosage easily. If he waited for the passage of time, the longer it was, the stronger the level 6 pseudosage would be. In the end, it might even recover to a strength that surpassed his current strength. At that time, he would be the one to be careful of. So it's like this. It really can't be that simple. Luo Fan's expression was a little ugly. He stopped searching the world to find the level 6 pseudosage and raised his hand to take out the 2 test certificates that he had obtained. He saw, unbeknownst when, the pocket watch had started counting down, just like in the previous world. Looking at the countdown, it was also 100 years. Apart from that, the copper ruler in his other hand began to flicker with a strange frequency. This strange fluctuation faintly matched the spatial fluctuation of this world, attracting the spatial laws of this world, causing the surface of the copper ruler to have traces of the existence of laws. There are no abnormalities in the nomological laws. It seems that I still have to follow the method of the previous two worlds and unify this world first. With this thought, Luo Fan began to walk, leaving a green trace in the void as he headed towards the capital of one of the few major forces in this world. This world was not in the shape of a planet, but a land with a round sky and a square earth. However, its area was not much larger than the solar system, and it was not much different from the two worlds that Luo Fan had experienced previously. Of course, the land area was much larger, so the number of living beings in this world was hundreds of millions of times more than the two worlds before. With such a large population spread across such a vast land, the density was rather sparse. With such a sparse population distribution, the major forces in this world were naturally far away from each other. It would be much more difficult to unify this world than the two worlds before. Therefore, the time Luo Fan gave himself to truly unify this world was 10 years. Compared to the time of the other two worlds, it was dozens of times longer. He was almost omnipotent in this world. There was nothing he did not know, and there was nothing he did not know. If he wanted to know the distribution and composition of the major forces in this world, it would only be a matter of a thought. When he searched the world for the level 6 pseudo-sage cultivator, he had already looked through all the information he needed. At this moment, he did not need to ask anyone to find the greatest force in this world. Soon, Luo Fan arrived in an area tens of thousands of kilometers away from the grassland where he had entered this world. He arrived above an extremely large city. The city was quite large, spanning a radius of several thousand miles. There were hundreds of small villages in the surroundings. There were also all sorts of farmland that could be seen with the naked eye. There were tens of millions of living beings in this city. In the center of the city was a majestic and gorgeous palace. In the palace, there was a martial soul that had already condensed, and it had even grown to a height of 300 meters. Even though it was not the strongest in this world, it was still a powerful existence in the first group. Based on Luo Fan's previous understanding, he knew that this powerful existence was the ruler of the most powerful country in this world. He directly controlled 10% of this world, which was comparable to the 90% controlled by the other hundreds of countries. His status, apart from the appearance of the United States in the previous world, it was basically the same as the United States in the previous world. Although he was considered an expert in this world to be able to condense a martial soul that was 300 meters tall, it was just a joke to Luo Fan. He did not even need to cultivate the cultivation system of this world. He could just rely on his own knowledge and experience. He could easily deal with it by analyzing the laws of this world. Moreover, he had already broken through the limits of this world with the help of the cultivation system of this world. Luo Fan did not land in the city. Instead, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. In an instant, a huge invisible palm appeared out of thin air in the city. Under the fearful eyes of countless living beings, it reached into the palace and grabbed a majestic, yellow-robed man who exuded an intense aura of an emperor. It was a middle-aged man who seemed like he could break the sky and earth at any time. This was the emperor of this country and the absolute overlord of this world. The middle-aged man had been enjoying something in the palace when he suddenly felt an indescribably terrifying invisible hand grab him. His expression changed drastically. His body swayed, and a 300 meters long golden five-clawed divine dragon rushed out of his body. This was his martial soul. To Luo Fan, he believed that he was the strongest in the endless universe. Of course, it was not his current self, but his future self. He would definitely be able to achieve the origin chaos Dao fruit in the future. Therefore, his martial soul would only look like himself. To the cultivators of this world, the ones that they believed to be the most powerful were very, very few, to the point that it was almost impossible for them to be the most powerful. Even this middle-aged man, who was considered the absolute overlord of this world, believed that the strongest existence was this golden five-clawed divine dragon that represented the supreme imperial power. This 300 meters long five-clawed divine dragon was extremely powerful. As soon as it appeared, it naturally gathered endless clouds and gathered a tenth of the will of the people in this world, turning it into a halo that surrounded its surroundings. Originally, this terrifying power might not have been enough to destroy the world, but moving mountains and filling the seas was a piece of cake. However, this terrifying five-clawed divine dragon was like a long worm in the invisible palm that Luo Fan had grabbed. Although it struggled mightily, it was ultimately unable to break free from Luo Fan's grasp. After struggling for a while, its body was directly shattered by the rebounding force, and all the golden fragments gathered back into the middle-aged man's body. At this moment, the middle-aged man's face was even paler, and there was an indescribable fear in his eyes. Luo Fan smiled and pulled the middle-aged man in front of him. He said, "From now on, you will do whatever I say. Do you have any objections?" The middle-aged man's face was filled with humiliation. He gritted his teeth several times and wanted to refuse, but in the end, he recalled the terrifying feeling from before. It was like he had become an ant that could be crushed into minced meat at any time, so he did not dare to refuse. After a while, he finally knelt before Luo Fan with a defeated expression and said, "I will do as you say, Exalted One. All right, from today on, I am the Divine King of this country. Go and build a Divine King Palace. You don't have to build it anywhere else, just above the Imperial Palace," Luo Fan said calmly. Above the Imperial Palace. The middle-aged man's expression changed again. However, he had already agreed to the most humiliating part, so this humiliation was not that hard to accept. Therefore, he agreed right away. This world was a world of cultivators. Although they cultivated martial souls, the efficiency was incomparable to an ordinary world. Therefore, in just a few days, a divine king palace that was even more majestic than the imperial palace appeared above the imperial palace. In order to complete the divine king palace as soon as possible, almost all the power of the country had been gathered. Moreover, in order to maintain the divine king palace above the imperial palace at all times, more than half of the country's treasury had been spent on it. Moreover, for a long time to come, the amount of resources that would make any cultivator in this world feel heartache every day. Well done. Luo Fan sat on the Divine King's throne in the Divine King Palace with a faint smile on his face as he spoke to the Emperor kneeling before him. Chapter 1291. Of course, Luo Fan didn't think that the Emperor would never have any rebellious thoughts just because he had passed the test. However, for him, no matter how rebellious the Emperor was, he could easily suppress it. Under such circumstances, he naturally didn't need to waste any effort to control him. As for the Divine King Palace, it naturally did not need to rely on the power of the country to keep it floating in the air. The power and resources of the country should be used to unify the entire world. How could it be wasted here? This problem might be almost impossible for the cultivators of this world, but it was extremely simple for Luo Fan. He only needed to slightly modify a very ordinary law on the Divine King's Palace with a single thought, and he would be able to make the Divine King's Palace float in the air. He did not need to use any resources or power in the kingdom. When Luo Fan finished modifying the Divine King Palace, the Emperor's expression suddenly changed. He was shocked, and the indescribable anger and hatred that had existed in his heart for the past few days suddenly disappeared. When the gap between them was still within an imaginable range, anger and hatred would naturally be born. However, when the gap had reached an incomprehensible height and reached an unimaginable level, the other party's actions would become natural. Anger and hatred would naturally not appear. It was just like how it was for a saint. If there was a problem with the world created by a saint, someone's interests would be harmed. Even if someone's family was destroyed, those people would only blame the existence that directly harmed their interests and destroyed their family. They would never blame the saint who created the world. And now, to the emperor, Luo Fan was like an omnipotent saint, a terrifying existence that could not be understood. It was difficult for him to even look up to such an existence. How could there be hatred because of this? Even all the demands and pressure that Luo Fan had placed on him previously had turned into a kind of honor at this moment, after his mentality changed. He immediately controlled his martial soul and flew above the imperial palace. He arrived at the Divine King Palace and requested to see Luo Fan. The Divine King Palace was so vast. Naturally, it was impossible for Luo Fan to be alone. However, Luo Fan did not need anyone else to be an eyesore here. Therefore, when he altered the laws of the God King's Hall, he had also created many spirits that were like martial souls, serving as servants in the God King's Hall. The rules of this world were originally suitable for the existence of spirit bodies. Otherwise, how could a cultivator condense a martial spirit within their body? To Luo Fan, this kind of rule was like a pillow when he was dozing off. He didn't even need to make any big move. He just needed to modify it slightly to create these martial souls out of thin air. Or perhaps, to be more precise, these spiritual servants could be said to be the martial souls of the Divine King Palace. The emperor was led by the martial spirit servant to see Luo Fan, and everything he saw along the way made him shocked beyond imagination. He was the one who built the Divine King Palace, so he couldn't be more clear about what it looked like when it was completed. However, at this moment, when he looked at the Divine King Palace again, he could only see traces of his construction. Almost every detail of the entire Divine King Palace was 1,000 times more exquisite than when he built it. Not to mention anything else, just the martial spirit servant in front of him that was guiding him was enough to stun him. Condensing martial souls out of thin air and treating martial souls as servants, to him, this method was as shocking as the saints moving freely in the primal chaos to Luo Fan. Under this stimulation, when he faced Luo Fan, he directly knelt on the ground and no longer dared to take his identity as the overlord of the world seriously. It was like an ordinary believer facing his God. Luo Fan could see through the emperor's mentality with a single glance. While he found it funny, he also felt that it was just right. He used a very ordinary tone to order, "Go down now and start to unify this world according to this step." As he spoke, he raised his hand and clapped lightly. A set of information was directly poured into the emperor's memory from nothingness. The current Luo Fan had already reached an unimaginable level of proficiency in the use of the laws of this world. With a raise of his hand or a kick, he could mobilize the laws of this world to respond to his actions. When he performed it, it was naturally untraceable, without any trace of abnormality. The emperor was shocked. When he looked at the additional information in his memory, an extremely excited expression instantly appeared on his face. Unifying the world was the dream of any emperor of a country. Even if the emperor was already the overlord of the entire world and had the power to suppress everyone in the world, there was no exception and he would not be satisfied with this. The plan that Luo Fan had set up was naturally incomparably perfect. With his current state of near omniscience about the entire world, the weaknesses of each country, how to conquer each country more smoothly, and how to minimize losses, all of this was as clear as looking at the lines on the palm of his hand. With the assistance of such information, if he could not formulate a perfect plan to conquer this world, then his wisdom, his cultivation, and his countless years of experience would all be placed in the hands of a dog. This plan is actually so perfect, it can be used as a textbook for conquering the world. The more the emperor looked at the plan, the more he thought about it. The more the emperor looked at the plan, the more shocked he was, and the more he respected Luo Fan. However, Luo Fan did not give him time to admire himself. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand and directly used the power of the laws of the world to send the emperor back to the palace below, and once again appeared on his throne. In the blink of an eye, the emperor had suddenly changed the world, and almost suspected whether he was dreaming. Fortunately, the information was still there, and he immediately understood Luo Fan's intentions. He did not dare to delay, and immediately began to issue countless orders according to Luo Fan's plan, and began to mobilize all the forces of this huge country that occupied 10% of the entire land, and almost all the cultivators in this country who had awakened their martial souls. All the armies, and even all the merchants, all had specific orders. These orders even went deep into each individual and deep into each clan. In the next few months, this entire country made friends from afar, and began to conquer the dozens of countries around this country that were not too weak, but were far from being comparable to this country itself. A vigorous war that spread across the entire world was directly launched. Countless cultivators, countless strategists, countless generals fought with their wits and courage, sacrificing their lives, spilling their blood, for Luo Fan, for that country. They began to integrate the forces of this entire world. They began to contribute to the unification of this entire world. 10 years. Let's see how long you can endure. Luo Fan sat on the Divine King Palace. Looking at the void in front of him, a faint smile appeared on his face. Other than passing the test as soon as possible, he was advancing the process of the unification of this world so quickly. He had to force that level 6 pseudo-sage out as soon as possible. That level 6 pseudo-sage was currently hiding, which meant that he did not have the strength to deal with him. If he had the strength, he would have long come to him in the past few months, and there would be no need for him to hide so deeply, and even make Luo Fan unable to find him after searching the entire world. In this case, it was obvious that what Luo Fan needed to do was to give him as little time as possible, and try to force him out before he was fully prepared. As for why unifying this world would force him out, the reason was even simpler. If this world was in the hands of Luo Fan, then Luo Fan would be able to find out what the abnormality of this world was as soon as possible. In this way, he would be able to pass the test as soon as possible and directly obtain the test certificate hidden in this world. At that time, no matter how well the level 6 pseudo-sage hid, he would definitely be found by him. Previously, this level 6 pseudo-sage could only resist Luo Fan, who had 2 test certificates. Now that he encountered Luo Fan, who had 3 test certificates, the result could be imagined. Luo Fan could see this very clearly. He believed that the level 6 pseudo-sage must have seen it very clearly. The level 6 pseudo-sage's patience was much stronger than what Luo Fan had expected. Luo Fan waited for nearly 10 years. According to the plan that Luo Fan had made at the beginning, unifying this world would take 10 years. However, plans could not keep up with changes, and there would be some accidents from time to time in the past 10 years, which almost messed up Luo Fan's plan. However, with an almost omnipotent existence like Luo Fan in this world, he could eliminate any variables with just a slight lift of his hand. Therefore, after nearly 10 years, the country that was supported by Luo Fan was actually about to unify the entire world, just like what Luo Fan had planned. It was about to become the first great country in this world to unify all the forces of the entire world. For the emperor of that country, the past 10 years were like living in a dream. When he first ordered the construction of the Divine King Palace 10 years ago, almost half of the people in the country thought that he had become muddle-headed and self-opinionated, and was no longer the wise ruler he used to be. However, in the past 10 years, the superb methods of mobilization, integration, and subjugation that he had displayed had long since caused that kind of reputation to disappear. At this moment, he was 10,000 times greater than the founder of this country. Countless saint emperors from ancient times to the present paled in comparison to him. At the very least, among the cultivators who had activated their martial souls in the past 10 years, almost 20 to 30% of them had martial souls that looked like him. From this, it could be seen how powerful his prestige was. Even with such prestige, the emperor was still rather clear-headed. To him, the divine king's palace that was suspended above the imperial palace was like a sharp sword that was hanging above his neck. It was a sword that could be swung down at any time and decapitate him. With such a sharp sword, no matter how much the officials flattered him, no matter how powerful his prestige was, he would not think that he could do as he pleased. He's really patient. He's actually watching me unify the world. Luo Fan sat on the throne of the divine king's palace and smiled as he looked at the void in front of him. There seemed to be a figure hidden in the darkness. In the past 10 years, the level 6 pseudo-saint did not make any movement. The process of unifying the country did not encounter any strong resistance at all, as if there had never been a level 6 pseudo-saint in the world. If Luo Fan had not seen the level 6 pseudo-saint enter this world with him, he would have doubted if he had really entered this world. Perhaps he would have doubted if he had really entered this world. Are you waiting until the end to reap the fruits of your labor? Or is your strength really recovering so slowly that you can't even recover enough strength to fight against me in 10 years? Luo Fan thought to himself. On the last day of the 10 years, the plan that Luo Fan had formulated back then was a perfect success. The last hidden force in this world was eliminated, and the entire world became a complete country. From then on, there were no more differences between countries. True unification, true peace finally came to this world. At this moment, the entire world seemed to be filled with an indescribable sense of jubilation, and it was even faintly evident. There was even a hint of a deeper change that was beginning to take place. Martial soul. It was unique to this world. It was determined by the uniqueness of the laws of this world. The two worlds that Luo Fan had unified previously did not have any abnormalities because the laws of the laws were not suitable for cultivation. It was equivalent to completely integrating the manpower and material resources of the entire world. However, this world was different. This world itself had cultivation and extraordinary power. The unification of this world was directly reflected in the extraordinary power. As a result, the laws of this world and the great Tao of this world naturally underwent some subtle changes. And this subtle change was manifested by the martial soul. A martial soul that belonged to this world, or rather, this country that unified the entire world. There's actually such an unexpected gain. Luo Fan could not help but reveal an inexplicable surprise on his face as he sensed the various subtle changes in the laws of this world. This martial soul was condensed by the entire world, and its power had reached an unimaginable level. As soon as it was born, it had already reached the limits of the world. Naturally, Luo Fan would not let go of such a martial soul. Although this martial soul was still within the limits of the world after it was condensed, it was still within the range that he could still suppress. However, it was still a powerful force after all. If it was obtained by someone else, it would definitely pose a threat to him and cause him some trouble. What Luo Fan wanted to eliminate the most right now were threats and troubles. Even if the martial soul condensed by the world was formless and intangible, since it had already been condensed, it naturally needed a carrier. It needed an existence to carry this martial soul. And now, to this world, the only thing that could act as a carrier for this martial soul was naturally the Emperor who unified the entire world with his wisdom and martial prowess. On this day, the Emperor offered sacrifices to the heavens on a mountain peak that was said to be able to connect to the heavens. He announced his great achievements to the heavens. This was a necessary procedure. Even with Luo Fan controlling everything from behind, the Emperor would absolutely not give up on this procedure of offering sacrifices to the heavens. This was because only by offering sacrifices to the heavens could he truly establish the legitimacy of this country. Only then could he truly allow this country to be truly recognized by all living beings in this world. Only then could this country be passed down from generation to generation. If this procedure was not followed, many ambitious people in this country could easily find some excuses to deny the legitimacy of this country in the future. They could start a rebellion and attempt to divide this country. Even if it did not appear during the emperor's reign, it would definitely appear during the reign of his descendants. And this was obviously something that the emperor did not want to see. The instant the emperor finished reciting a large piece of complicated and awkward prose and burned it, the entire world began to tremble subtly. Although this tremble was extremely subtle, it made all living beings in this world feel that a change was occurring. They suddenly understood that the greatest and most important change in this world since its birth was about to occur. For a moment, an indescribable solemnity appeared in everyone's hearts. At this moment, the emperor of this world was standing straight on the peak of the mountain, looking at a figure that was gradually appearing in the sky above him in shock. This figure was unimaginably huge, as if the entire world could not contain it. However, it was extremely strange that the emperor of this world could clearly see its entire appearance. This figure was extremely blurry when it first appeared, as if it was an illusion. But as time passed, it became clearer, more and more real, and more obvious. In the end, after a few dozen breaths' time, it seemed to have become a real living being. It appeared in the sky and looked down at him, the entire world, and all the living beings in this world with an indifferent gaze. How can this be? At this moment, the expression on the emperor's face was already filled with shock and fear. He could vaguely guess that this figure that seemed to be the entire world was a shocking martial soul. However, what he was afraid of was the appearance of this martial soul. It was actually the owner of the divine king palace. The existence that had controlled the unification of the entire world for the past 10 years, the existence that had given him endless confidence and allowed him to finally unify the entire world. It's actually my appearance. It seems like I've left a huge shadow in his heart. Luo Fan could not help but smile when he saw the appearance of the martial soul in the Divine King Palace. Chapter 1292. If it was in another form, Luo Fan would still need to think of some ways to take possession of this martial soul. Now that it was in this form, he didn't even need to think much to refine this martial soul. Although the form of the martial soul was just an image, it did not seem to have any special meaning. However, the birth of the martial soul was based on the obsession of the owner of the martial soul. It was the martial soul's recognition of the most powerful existence in the world. Under such circumstances, the form of the martial soul naturally represented the status of the owner of the image in the heart of the owner of the martial soul. This status would naturally allow the owner of the image to have an unimaginable advantage when facing the owner of the martial soul. The advantage would be enough for the owner of the image to refine the martial soul and make it his own. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat as he raised his hand and pointed at the martial soul in the void, which was as huge as the entire world. In an instant, the martial soul, which was originally sinking towards the World Emperor and was about to merge with the World Emperor, paused for a moment. The direction of its descent changed slightly, and it turned towards where Luo Fan was, gradually sinking towards where Luo Fan was. At this moment, the World Emperor felt as if he had lost something extremely important. An indescribable sense of loss arose involuntarily. However, this feeling only lasted for a moment. When he discovered that the martial soul was exactly the same as the God King, he completely lost the thought of taking it for himself. As a matter of fact, he no longer dared to think about the possibility of the martial soul fusing with him. Therefore, although his face was twitching, however, he could only watch as the gigantic martial soul slowly sank away from him. At this moment, in Luo Fan's Divine King Palace, the martial soul had already arrived above his head. Its size gradually shrank during this process. From its original state that seemed to fill the entire world, it gradually shrank to a height of tens of thousands of feet and continued to shrink. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable sense of danger approaching him. His heart skipped a beat as he instantly had a guess. He could not help but smile. He raised his hand. A copper ruler and a pocket watch appeared between his hands. After these 2 test certificates appeared, he casually waved the copper ruler around him. In an instant, an incomparably stable spatial barrier was formed. It directly protected him in the center. At this moment, there was a loud bang. An incomparably powerful force directly bombarded the incomparably tough space barrier that he had drawn with the copper ruler, causing an earth-shattering, terrifying shock. It caused the space barrier to tremble slightly. Even the spatial barrier that could withstand attacks from pseudo-holy beings was beginning to tremble so violently, so one could only imagine how terrifying the shockwaves were. In an instant, the Divine King's palace that had been created by the World Emperor and modified by Luo Fan collapsed in an instant. The great building that had consumed a portion of the national power of the country before the unification of the world, the great building that had consumed an unknown amount of precious materials, directly turned into countless fine powder that fell down in a plain and simple manner, completely submerging the entire imperial palace below. Such a terrifying shock directly spread out from the capital of the country, which was also the current capital of the entire world. A gust of wind was generated, causing countless buildings in the capital of the world to collapse and countless living beings to perish in the process. Do you only know how to sneak attack? A level 6 pseudo-holy being style is even worse than a hooligan's, Luo Fan said calmly. Although the impact of the impact was great, it did not cause him any psychological pressure at all. He directly floated in the void, his expression calm and indifferent. Above him, the towering martial soul was still shrinking at a steady pace, as if it was completely unaffected by what had just happened. Suddenly, a voice was heard. How dare a junior speak to me like that? You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Such a hoarse voice entered Luo Fan's ears. This made Luo Fan slightly surprised. This voice was different from the voice of the level 6 pseudo-holy being that he had heard before. Could it be that this person was not the level 6 pseudo-holy being? However, he soon realized that he had guessed wrong. This person was indeed the level 6 pseudo-holy being, but in comparison, he was many times older than before. The wrinkles on his body were so numerous that they could clamp words to death. His entire body was like a skeleton covered with a layer of skin. At this moment, he appeared above the head of the martial soul that had shrunk to more than 90,000 feet and raised his hand to gently press on the head of the martial soul. The martial soul actually stopped shrinking after being pressed by him, as if it had been directly locked in place. Junior? Perhaps my seniority isn't that high, but is seniority really that important to cultivators? Luo Fan only smiled faintly. His figure slowly rose, and in a short while, he arrived in front of the level 6 pseudo-holy being and faced him from afar. Looks like you've paid a huge price in order to obtain your current strength, Luo Fan said with a smile on his face. This person's current strength had already surpassed the limits of heaven and earth, but it had not reached the point where it was almost omnipotent like Luo Fan. It was obvious that he was still lacking. The level 6 pseudo-holy being's face twitched, and there was a flash of resentment in his eyes. Although he was a level 6 pseudo-holy being with a tenacious Tao heart, he had not reached the point where he had no desires. No matter how thick-skinned the level 6 pseudo-holy being was, he would not remain unaffected after being mocked by a junior like Luo Fan. After a while, the level 6 pseudo-holy being said, "Although I've paid a price, it's all worth it as long as I can defeat you. You and I have been fighting secretly for 10 years, but we still don't know how to address each other. I wonder if you have the honor of knowing how to address Senior?" Luo Fan said with a smile. "There's no need for that. I have no intention of revealing my name to a dead person," the level 6 pseudo-holy being said. With that, he could not be bothered to talk nonsense with Luo Fan anymore. He raised his hand and a tortoise shell appeared in his hand. After the tortoise shell appeared, a wave of terrifying energy shot out from it. However, this energy was not directed at Luo Fan, but at the martial soul below him. a martial soul that looked like Luo Fan. Luo Fan was slightly shocked. He did not expect the level 6 pseudo-holy being to attack the martial soul instead of himself. However, his reaction was extremely fast. In that instant, he took advantage of the extremely close connection between him and the martial soul to move the martial soul slightly. He raised his palms and put them together in the middle. The martial soul itself was the martial soul of the world. In terms of level alone, it was naturally only the limit of the world. It was not higher than Luo Fan and the level 6 pseudo-holy being. However, regardless of the realm, in terms of power alone, it was more powerful than everything else. With such a slap, even time, space, rules, laws, matter, energy, everything had a tendency to return to chaos under this slap. An unimaginable chaos appeared directly above its head, directly enveloping the level 6 pseudo-holy being in between the two palms. The level 6 pseudo-holy being's expression changed slightly. He did not expect Luo Fan to have such an influence on the martial soul. For a moment, he suddenly felt a little regretful. He regretted that he should have attacked earlier instead of waiting for the martial soul to appear. However, even if he regretted it in his heart, he couldn't change the fact that he was now facing Luo Fan. He couldn't change the fact that he had to fight Luo Fan to the death this time. Either he obtained the 2 test certificates in Luo Fan's hands, and then accepted Luo Fan's achievements in unifying the entire world in the past 10 years, or he would die, and Luo Fan would directly snatch away the test certificates in his hands, or even his memories. Under such pressure, the level 6 pseudo-sage became extremely solemn and serious. The tortoise shell naturally released a stream of energy, directly forming a strange energy shield, directly isolating all space, time, rules, laws, matter, and energy. He was protected by the energy alone, completely blocking the invasion of the chaos that suddenly appeared around him. However, this was only temporary. The greatest threat to him was not the chaos that he was currently blocking, but the 2 huge hands of the martial soul that had caused this chaos. If he did not dodge or think of a way to stop the 2 huge hands, he would definitely be smashed into minced meat the moment they slammed down, no matter how mysterious his energy shield was. However, his tortoise shell itself was a kind of test certificate. It was a level 9 pseudo-sage artifact, so its power was beyond imagination. How could the energy released by the tortoise shell not have any effect on the martial soul? How could it allow the martial soul to be controlled by Luo Fan? In an instant, the energy exploded inside the martial soul, turning into countless tiny threads that directly swept across the martial soul. It completely occupied every inch of space inside the martial soul, causing the martial soul to be completely wrapped in the thread. If these threads were only made of ordinary energy, they wouldn't be able to affect the martial soul even if they were 10,000 times tighter. However, these energies could even replace the existence of time, space, rules, and nomological laws with their own changes. As a result, the threads that they had turned into naturally had a characteristic that could not be severed or affected. As a result, the martial soul suddenly stopped under these threads. The 2 huge hands that were only a few feet away from smashing the level 6 pseudo-sacred level martial soul into minced meat also stopped completely at this moment. The astonishing chaos that enveloped the level 6 pseudo-sage was originally caused by the 2 big hands clapping because of the terrifying force contained in the 2 hands. Now that the 2 hands had stopped, the clapping naturally disappeared, and the chaos caused by the clapping gradually subsided. In a short while, everything returned to normal, and the surroundings of the level 6 pseudo-sage returned to normal. Luo Fan had long expected that the martial soul wouldn't be able to hurt the level 6 pseudo-sage, but in his opinion, the level 6 pseudo-sage would at most use a special method to escape from the 2 huge hands. However, he never thought that his method would be so direct, and the effect would be so obvious. He could actually directly restrict the martial soul of that world. Good! Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim when he saw the exquisite use of energy. This exquisite use of energy gave him a lot of inspiration. With a thought, he pointed the copper ruler in his hand at the level 6 pseudosage. In an instant, strange fine space rushed out from the copper ruler and condensed into a colorless and transparent divine dragon in the void, with a posture of rejecting everything. It pounced towards the level 6 pseudosage. This colorless and transparent divine dragon was completely a space, an extremely pure space that didn't even have time, rules, energy, or matter. Because of its purity, such a space produced power that was many times stronger than normal. In the process of pouncing over, the entire world seemed to shake with its attack, and there were even faint muffled vibrations on the colorless divine dragon. Compared to the energy displayed by the level 6 pseudosage, this colorless divine dragon had different characteristics because it was condensed from space. However, the momentum of the attack was much greater. The level 6 pseudosage saw this. He couldn't help but change his expression slightly. Obviously, he didn't expect Luo Fan to learn his method so quickly. Moreover, the effect seemed to be stronger than what he had displayed, and the degree of subtlety seemed to be beyond what he had displayed. He didn't dare to let it hit the energy shield around his body like before. The refining process of the martial soul below also stopped. His body swayed slightly. With a flicker of his figure, he had already disappeared on the spot. Luo Fan had now completely locked onto him, so he naturally wouldn't lose track of him just like that. With a wave of the copper ruler in his hand, the colorless divine dragon drilled into the void and directly tore a hole in space. Not far away from him, he saw a level 6 pseudo-divine sage enveloped in an energy barrier, rushing toward him between the inside and outside of this world. The level 6 pseudosage had already expected this. The tortoise shell in his hand shook, and two large hands stretched out from the energy shield, instantly grabbing the body of the colorless divine dragon. The colorless divine dragon was under Luo Fan's absolute control, so its reaction speed was naturally extremely fast. In the gap, its body swam, drawing a mysterious trajectory, bypassing the two large energy hands, and its 5 claws grabbed at the two large energy hands in a way that contained the essence of the universe and the mysteries of heaven and earth. In the blink of an eye, the two large energy hands and the colorless divine dragon started fighting in that gap. The colorless divine dragon condensed by Luo Fan using absolute space was extremely powerful and had amazing combat power, but the level 6 pseudosage controlling the tortoiseshell was not much weaker. More importantly, he was a level 6 pseudosage. Even if he didn't have enough power, his experience and vision were enough for him to fight beyond his level. With his limited power, he could do things that would have required hundreds or even thousands of times more power to do. During this battle, the level 6 pseudosage and the colorless divine dragon gradually broke away from the strange place in the gap and returned to this world. In that gap, time, space, matter, energy, nomological laws, and everything else were in a state of indiscernible existence. The effect of the battle was difficult to see. However, after returning to this world, the terrifying effect of the battle and the amazing destructive power of both sides were displayed without reservation. Although Luo Fan had deliberately diverted the aftermath of the battle still completely destroyed the world capital that Luo Fan had been watching for 10 years after a few dozen breaths. It wasn't as simple as razing the city to the ground, but a huge pit was opened in the original location of the city. Seeing this, even Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a little displeased. It wasn't because of any benevolence, but because the entire world was now his. Everything in this city had now become his power. Under such circumstances, the destruction of this city was obviously a loss to him. However, although he had the upper hand now, his opponent was a level 6 pseudosage, after all, so he couldn't focus too much on other things. Therefore, although he knew that any damage to this world from the aftermath of the battle would be a loss to him, he couldn't suppress or eliminate the damage at all. He could only watch as more and more places were destroyed in the battle, and watch as the power that could help him pass the test of this world in the future continued to decrease. This kind of feeling was naturally quite sullen and uncomfortable. At a certain moment, he finally couldn't help but let the colorless divine dragon and the level 6 pseudo-sage fight, and his body directly rushed into the world martial soul in front of him. The world martial soul was densely packed, and the energy emitted by the tortoise shell sealed everything. Even if Luo Fan entered it, he would be greatly restricted. Although his safety wouldn't be threatened, it would be difficult for him to achieve his goal of fully controlling this martial soul. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan would rather fight with the level 6 pseudo-sage than enter the martial soul and break the energy to achieve his goal of fully controlling this martial soul. However, at this moment, because he couldn't deal with the level 6 pseudo-sage in a short period of time, and if he continued, the damage to this world would be too great, which might ultimately affect his chances of passing this test, so he had to take the risk. Sure enough, the moment he entered the martial soul, the boundless threads of energy within the martial soul started to tremble violently like a spiderweb. After that, the countless threads of energy swiftly gathered towards him and intended to envelop his entire body. In order to achieve this goal, he even gradually gave up on the restriction and control of the martial soul. Chapter 1293. This was a phenomenon formed after Luo Fan used the power of the pocket watch to isolate the time dimension he was in, using a special method, completely repelling all other elements except time. This kind of illusion was not really an illusion, but a strange state where he suddenly left the original time dimension, but had an extremely close connection with this time dimension. Due to the difference in time dimension, it was almost impossible to come into contact with Luo Fan in this state. However, because of the close connection with this time dimension, he could project his figure in this time dimension. That was why this scene appeared now. This change was beyond the control of the Class 6 pseudo-sage, and in an instant, the Class 6 pseudo-sage's control over the martial soul stopped. How could Luo Fan not seize such a great opportunity? In an instant, his willpower blasted into the depths of the martial soul, and in the blink of an eye, the martial soul showed signs of turning into another body of his. Then, the entire martial soul shrank extremely quickly while it was not wrapped and sealed by the countless energy threads. In the blink of an eye, it shrank from its original height of tens of thousands of meters to the same height as Luo Fan's body. At this moment, the Class 6 pseudo-sage also reacted. However, he knew that it would be difficult to target Luo Fan's main body, who had already activated the pocket watch's miraculous effect, with the energy threads left in the martial soul. Thus, he placed the target of the blockade on the martial soul again and began to spread it to every part of the martial soul. He wanted to completely seal the entire martial soul like before. This made it difficult for it to truly integrate with Luo Fan's body. Although compared to the martial soul that was several thousand feet tall, Luo Fan's current fusion with this martial soul was much stronger. Using the energy threads to control and seal it was more than 100 times more difficult than before. However, compared to Luo Fan's original body, which was untraceable and could not find any opportunity to take advantage of, it was difficult to deal with this martial soul, but at least he could see the target. He could find a path to follow. For the Class 6 pseudo-sage, this was naturally easier. Naturally, it was easier for him. I've finally succeeded. At this time, Luo Fan suddenly had this thought. This martial soul was almost the same size as his body, and it was only one step away from completely fusing with his body. Previously, he had firmly sealed this martial soul. The martial spirit was unable to move. At this moment, the martial soul that couldn't vibrate in the slightest had already been compressed into an extremely thin layer that appeared in the gap between him and the martial soul. When these strands of energy were spread out, they could cover every inch of the martial spirit's body, which was tens of thousands of feet long. Naturally, it was enough to seal off the entire martial spirit. From the outside, the color of the entire martial spirit had become the color of the energy threads, and it was difficult to see Luo Fan's body inside the martial spirit. Due to the compression, the sealing ability of these energy threads was more than 100 times stronger than before. If he had used a normal method, even if Luo Fan used all of his strength to attack the energy, he might not have been able to shake it. However, at this moment, Luo Fan didn't need to use that normal method. The connection between him and this martial spirit was enough for him to use the magical effect of the pocket watch on this martial spirit. With a single thought, his martial soul transformed into an illusory shadow in the air, just like his body. It was as if it had completely assimilated with his body. To the Class 6 pseudo-sage, such a change was like the force that had been supporting his body had suddenly disappeared, and he had been thrown down from the sky. This really caught him off guard. The countless energy threads that were originally sealing and suppressing the martial spirit suddenly exploded, and instantly formed a huge human figure that was tens of thousands of feet tall outside Luo Fan's body. However, this human figure was not stable, and it rapidly expanded and squirmed. In the end, it completely shrank and attacked the center, as if it wanted to completely shatter something in the center. Unfortunately, at this moment, Luo Fan's body had already completely fused with the world's martial soul in a state that was both illusory and real, although the realm of this martial spirit was equivalent to the limit of heaven and earth, because it was the martial spirit of this world. The world itself was almost like his body. When Luo Fan controlled this martial spirit, this world was simply equivalent to his external incarnation. This allowed him to suddenly deepen his grasp of this world to a deeper level. His omniscient, omnipotent might suddenly deepened by many times. With just a thought, the countless energy threads suddenly shrank into a ball due to a natural change in space and time, turning into a tiny dot that appeared on his palm. Such a small dot was constantly trembling and vibrating, looking like a ball of yarn that was undergoing countless complex changes at every moment. It actually looked a little cute. Seeing this change, the Class 6 pseudo-sage's expression changed drastically. What he saw with his naked eyes, and what he sensed through the energy threads were clearly polar opposites. In his senses, the energy threads were still sealing Luo Fan and the martial spirit in the center. Every change was targeted at Luo Fan's body and the martial spirit. This was so different from what he saw, where the energy threads had completely turned into toys in the other party's hands, that he instantly felt a sense of danger that made his blood run cold. This person's control of this world has already reached an extremely high level. I'm currently weak, and I'm no match for him at all. This thought instantly appeared in his mind. This thought. After understanding this, he suddenly regretted it. He regretted attacking Luo Fan in that world and snatching the 2 test certificates from Luo Fan's hands. With his own ability, it would not be difficult for him to obtain more test certificate. Snatching Luo Fan's test certificate would only save him some time. However, how could there be any medicine for regret in this world? Although he knew that he had made a mistake back then, if he were to return to that time, he might still make a move. After all, he was a Class 6 pseudo-sage, and Luo Fan seemed to be only a weak Class 1 pseudo-sage. Even if he was slightly stronger than ordinary Class 1 pseudo-sages, he was still only a Class 1 pseudo-sage. Such an existence. To him, it was really an existence akin to an ant. Usually, he would not even take a second look when he encountered it. Once he was interested, naturally he would instinctively snatch it. Why would he consider too much? As a Class 6 pseudo-sage, it was very likely that he had survived the last test of the Buddha 10 trillion years ago. There was no need to say much about this person's life-saving means. His decisiveness had also reached an admirable level. After discovering that he could not resist the current Luo Fan, he made a prompt decision. With a soft shout, the tortoiseshell in his hand shook violently. In an instant, the countless cracks on the tortoiseshell instantly expanded. The entire tortoiseshell, which could control energy and even display various characteristics of time, space, matter, and even nomological laws, was instantly torn apart by the countless cracks and turned into countless tiny pieces. This sort of change caused an astonishing tremor, and an astonishing power to erupt forth. The shock and power instantly tore the world apart. The point where the world was torn apart was none other than the location where the Class 6 pseudosage was, which was also where the tortoiseshell was originally located. Luo Fan looked through the tear in the world and found that behind this world was a place with an indescribable color and shape. It was the place where he entered the test world every time, the world where the Buddhist Supreme's magic treasure was located. The moment the crack appeared, the Class 6 pseudosage did not hesitate at all. He turned around and entered the crack, completely disappearing in front of Luo Fan. He completely disappeared from this world, as if he had never appeared. After he disappeared, the tiny crack that could only accommodate the Class 6 pseudosage disappeared without a trace. It was completely repaired by the nomological laws of this world. Everything seemed normal, and it was impossible to tell that there had been a crack here before. It was a passage to the next level. After all these changes subsided, the ball of wool in Luo Fan's hand also gradually calmed down. In the end, it turned into an existence that seemed to have substance. It was like a small stone that lay quietly on Luo Fan's palm. After losing his opponent, the five-clawed divine dragon that Luo Fan had previously unleashed, which was completely condensed from pure space, began to gradually dissipate. It was swallowed and assimilated by the other existences of the main team in this world, completely becoming a part of this world. He actually used the destruction of the test certificate as the price to open a passage to leave the test world. Luo Fan looked at the place where the Class 6 pseudosage disappeared with a look of admiration on his face. Although it had slightly exceeded his expectations in the beginning that the test voucher could have such a miraculous effect, he suddenly realized that compared to the other miraculous effects, using one's own body as the price to open a barrier to leave the test world was clearly something that couldn't be more normal. What made Luo Fan admire the Class 6 pseudosage's decisiveness even more? He had clearly just fused with the martial soul of this world, and had just obtained a power that could really threaten him. However, the Class 6 pseudosage actually reacted and decisively gave up the test certificate that he had used to sneak an attack on Luo Fan to get out of danger first. This kind of decisiveness was what Luo Fan admired the most. It seems that people who can live for a long time are indeed admirable. Luo Fan sighed, and with a thought, the entire world changed again. The many damages caused by the battle between him and the Class 6 pseudosage were instantly restored, as if time had been reversed. It was not just the dead things such as the terrain. Even the many living beings that had died in the previous battle were resurrected in the process. They reappeared in their original positions, looked around blankly, and recalled the extremely realistic illusion of death. This was a very common thing in other worlds. It was impossible for Luo Fan in the past. After all, although he had broken through the limits of this world, he had used the cultivation system of this world to achieve the breakthrough. Therefore, he was still vaguely shackled by this world, and could not change the many laws of this world at will. Naturally, he could not reverse the laws of life and death, and could not resurrect the many dead living beings. However, he had now fused with the martial soul of this world. This world itself. It was equivalent to his external incarnation. What he could do to his external incarnation, he could naturally do the same to this world. In this way, it was naturally a simple thing for him to reverse the laws between life and death. All living beings could die with a single thought. All living beings could be born with a single thought. It was as natural as turning one's hand. Such a miracle was simply subverting the worldview of all living beings in this world. At this moment, Even those who had no faith treated Luo Fan, who had done all this, as the supreme divine king. A faith that far surpassed the faith of the emperor of this world directly gathered around Luo Fan, allowing Luo Fan to use it as he pleased. As he sensed the faith, Luo Fan's heart moved. He condensed it and turned it into a divine king palace. It continued to rise, and in an instant, it surpassed the original divine king palace. In the end, it rushed into the sky and turned into another sun. The divine light it emitted illuminated the world, allowing all living beings in this world to clearly see the light that belonged to the divine king, the light that belonged to Luo Fan. If this was any other world with the rule of divine ascension, the faith would be enough to create a god above gods. However, here, it only allowed Luo Fan to create a divine king palace, allowing Luo Fan to have a place of residence that matched his identity. With that, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He took a step and instantly crossed space, directly appearing in the sky. He set foot in the God King's hall. Compared to the previous Divine King Palace, the Divine King Palace was more sacred, more majestic, and livelier. As it was born from the faith of all living beings toward Luo Fan, the Divine King Palace was naturally filled with countless distracting thoughts that took the form of various living beings. They became the servants of the Divine King Palace and busied themselves in the Divine King Palace. Compared to the martial souls in the past, the spirits formed from faith were more agile and more like real people. Furthermore, they were more powerful. If the servants in the Divine King Palace in the past were only equivalent to experts with martial souls that were 10 or 20 meters tall, then the servants now could match experts with martial souls that were 30 or 20 meters tall. So it really is the Supreme Divine King. The World Emperor had made great contributions to the world. Although the martial soul condensed from the world had been stolen by Luo Fan due to special reasons, he still possessed an extremely special authority over the world. This authority allowed him to sense many things happening in the world with greater clarity than other living beings. Before, the world had almost been destroyed, but it had been reborn. All living beings had died and all living beings had been revived. He had seen everything. Compared to the blind admiration of others, he had witnessed the Divine King's power extremely clearly. The shock and faith in him were even more determined than everyone else. At that moment, the Emperor of this world changed from worshipping the heavens to worshipping the God King. He led hundreds of millions of subjects and worshipped the second sun in the sky in an extremely solemn ceremony, where the outline of a palace could clearly be seen. Song after song of praise and faith poured into the Divine King Palace, and Luo Fan, who was sitting in the Divine King Palace, felt it. Perfect timing, thought Luo Fan when he sensed the changes. With a wave of his hand, a will was transmitted back along with the faith. In an instant, a calm voice that contained boundless majesty appeared in the hearts of all the worshippers, including the World Emperor. This world will be destroyed in 90 years. All of you must do your best to find the source of the destruction. If you cannot find it, 90 years will be the end of the world. The world will collapse, and all living things will be wiped out. Even I will not be able to stop it. After saying that, Luo Fan no longer cared about them. He believed that with such an order, those living beings would definitely have enough motivation to study the world and find the source of its destruction. They would search for the method to pass the test he wanted. Luo Fan's guess was very accurate. At the moment his words reached the hearts of the world's emperor and the millions of subjects, the subjects were still excited and delighted from being able to come into contact with the God King's mind. However, when they suddenly sensed the contents of the words, almost all of them were stunned. None of them dared to believe what they had sensed. As a result, all of them became at a loss. After a while, they finally returned to their senses. After asking around, they finally confirmed that what they had received was not an illusion. The world was really going to be destroyed in 90 years. Even the omnipotent Divine King seemed to be unable to stop this process. For a time, indescribable despair and chaos spread among the millions of subjects. Even the world emperor did not know how to react at this time. After a long time of chaos, the world emperor finally restored order. He stopped the ceremony of worshipping the divine king and began to mobilize the power of the entire world. Just as Luo Fan had thought, he began to study the world and search for the source of the abnormality, or rather, the source of its destruction. Chapter 1294. The development of the matter was just as Luo Fan had expected. In the next 10 years, the combined forces of all the creatures in the world erupted with astonishing power. Within this period of time, they found the source of the abnormality in this world. At the same time, they also confirmed what the Supreme Godly King had told them 10 years ago, that this world would be destroyed in 90 years, and that the end of the world would come in 90 years. When the abnormality was finally confirmed, all the researchers who knew about it fell into an indescribable despair. Unknowingly, Luo Fan had become their last hope. After a period of chaos, the research report was personally delivered to the Godly King's palace by the World Emperor, who was grasping at the last straw of hope, and presented it to Luo Fan. During this period of time, as the living beings in this world continued to research and search for the source of this world's abnormality and destruction, Luo Fan did not waste any time. He also used his own method to observe the laws of this world, and similarly searched for the source of this world's destruction. However, even though he was almost omnipotent in this world, because he was in this world, his senses and everything else were restricted by this world. Therefore, just like the previous worlds, he could not find any abnormalities at all. In the past 10 years, instead, he had a better understanding of the laws of this world, and the power he could unleash had become even more powerful. Its matter turning into nothingness. After flipping through the research report, Luo Fan suddenly had a feeling of enlightenment. In fact, he already had this feeling twice when he was reading the research reports of those researchers. It was a feeling of I've searched for him in my dreams thousands of times, but when I look back, that person is in the dim light. Before the answer was revealed, it was complicated no matter how he looked at it, and he could not figure it out no matter how much he thought about it. However, after the answer was revealed, he realized that the answer was that simple, and the truth was that simple: death is merciful, take pity on the difficulties of all living beings, and use a wonderful method to prevent the arrival of doomsday. The World Emperor didn't dare to peek at Luo Fan. After Luo Fan received the report, he kowtowed. He cried and pleaded. Luo Fan smiled and said, "I have my own plans. You may leave." Luo Fan was no longer in the mood to entertain the living beings of this world. Therefore, even though he clearly knew what the Emperor of this world wanted, he would never do it even if he could. Thus, he did not give the answer that the World Emperor wanted. The World Emperor was confused as he was led away by the heroic spirit. He was at a loss as to what Luo Fan meant. Would he stop the apocalypse or not? Of course, for the sake of the stability of the world, this kind of confusion, he naturally wouldn't reveal it. In front of his millions and millions of subjects, he only displayed his absolute confidence, saying that death was merciful and would definitely prevent the arrival of the apocalypse. For the hundreds of millions of subjects, regardless of whether these words were true or not, this was what they wanted. For a moment, Luo Fan gained faith. Instead, it had increased by several points compared to the previous 10 years. At this time, Luo Fan no longer cared about this. He looked at the boundless layer of laws in front of him and kept searching. Soon, he found what he was looking for. It was the nomological law related to the origin of matter. It was a nomological law that could be called the law of matter. The entire layer of laws contained endless laws, and within these laws, there were countless laws. Of course, there would be more than one law related to matter, just like there would be more than one law related to time and space. In fact, The number of laws and laws related to matter was unimaginable, but it was definitely in the hundreds of millions. However, just like time and space, among so many laws and laws, there must be the most origin of the law that was closest to the essence of matter. This was a law that could be called matter. In the previous two worlds, the law of time and the law of space actually existed in this nature. However, this did not mean that time was only related to that law, nor did it mean that space was only related to that law. This law of matter was quietly lying on Luo Fan's palm at this time. Compared to other laws, the law of matter had different characteristics. At first glance, it seemed to be nothingness, but upon closer inspection, one would gradually get the feeling that there was a mountain, a continent, and the heaviest thing in the world. As he held this law, Luo Fan naturally had all kinds of inexplicable illusions. When his mind was in a trance, he would feel like he was holding everything that existed in the entire world. This feeling was very special, and it was different from the feeling when he held the law of time and the law of space in the previous two worlds. There are pros and cons sure enough. Luo Fan sighed. He was very clear about the difference in this feeling. It was a feeling that was reflected back from the world martial soul. He had obtained unimaginable power from the world martial soul, and he could use it to perform all kinds of incredible magical powers. However, at the same time, he had to accept the interference of the world martial soul, which allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the laws and laws of this world. This was already the case now. If he wanted to accelerate the end of this world, he might even suffer from the backlash of the world martial soul. At this thought, Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly. After finding the root cause of the world's collapse, it was no longer a big problem for Luo Fan to use the same method to destroy the entire world. The law of matter was different from the law of space. The space of this world would not condense energy to repair the collapse of matter. Therefore, it did not treat space as such. It needed all the space in the world to work together in order to destroy the entire world. With regards to the material laws, he could directly accelerate the process of the material turning into nothingness at any place. Then, through the spread of this nothingness, he could finally destroy the entire world by turning into nothingness. After understanding this, Luo Fan did not waste any time. He immediately started the process of accelerating the destruction of this world in the Divine King Palace, the creation of all living beings' faith. In his hands, the law of matter began to undergo a subtle change. This change caused everything in the area to change. Apart from Luo Fan himself, the others began to slowly turn into nothingness. These materials naturally included the Divine King Palace that was condensed from the faith of all living beings. However, in the very first moment, the God King's hall gradually turned transparent like another sun. In the end, it gradually vanished, as if it had never appeared in the first place. Such a change. To the countless lives in the world, it was like the sky had collapsed. Everyone stared at the sky in shock. They stared at the God King's hall that had hung in the sky for a decade, illuminating the world at all times and illuminating it at all times. Suddenly it disappeared. Has the God King abandoned us? This thought kept reverberating in everyone's hearts. An indescribable sense of despair arose spontaneously. Amid this despair, the martial soul that had fused with Luo Fan suddenly began to change. The martial soul that had originally belonged to Luo Fan began to change gradually. A black aura gradually appeared on its body. This black aura had an indescribable corrosive ability. Once it appeared, it directly acted on the martial soul, causing it to continuously disintegrate. At the same time, as the martial soul disintegrated, Luo Fan's body, which had already fused with the martial soul of this world, also disintegrated. Although the martial soul was the martial soul of this world. However, the root cause of its emergence was the unification of the entire world. It was also because the World Emperor had opened up a path of peace for the entire world. In other words, The appearance of this martial soul was fundamentally due to the existence of living beings. Therefore, the change in the mentality of living beings and the despair in their hearts were naturally reflected in the martial soul, causing the martial soul to naturally change. I can't believe it's backfiring in such a way. Looks like there's no need to use it. Luo Fan sighed. With a thought, the martial soul suddenly trembled and rushed out of his body. Not long after, it turned into a martial soul that was almost the same size as the entire world. It was shrouded in black fog. He had directly reversed the cultivation of this world, separated the martial soul that had completely fused with his body, and blasted it out of his body once again. Such a method was clearly unimaginable to the orthodox cultivators of this world. It was enough to topple their worldview. However, to Luo Fan it couldn't be any more normal. He didn't even need to think much about it. With a thought, he could naturally do it. The martial soul in the void didn't dissipate immediately. Instead, it turned its gaze and stared intently at Luo Fan, who was in the middle of the Divine King Palace. His eyes were gradually turning red and black as they stared at the material laws of this world, accelerating the process of the entire world's materialization by 1,000 times. A martial soul didn't have any consciousness, even if it was a world martial soul. However, at this moment, the martial soul's eyes were filled with fury and murderous intent. It was like a creature filled with hatred was staring at an enemy that it wanted to kill. At this moment, all the living beings below finally noticed the abnormality above them. At that moment, everyone was dumbfounded. They didn't know how to react. The change in the sky was just too obscure and profound. Even if ordinary people saw it, they wouldn't know what was going on. They couldn't understand why a martial soul would appear out of nowhere, nor why it seemed to be venting its anger at someone. Suddenly, an illusory figure charged up from below and directly fused with the martial soul that resembled Luo Fan. Following that, the martial soul's appearance gradually changed. From Luo Fan's appearance, it gradually turned into a divine dragon, a 5-clawed, golden divine dragon. After the divine dragon appeared, it roared at the sky and suddenly charged at Luo Fan. Its surroundings were filled with surging murderous intent. The black mist emitted by the martial soul gradually accumulated around its body and gradually turned into clouds. It completely enveloped its body, making it seem like it was riding on dark clouds. Its aura suddenly increased by several times. The figure that charged up from below was none other than the World Emperor. After the martial soul was blasted out of Luo Fan's body, it naturally searched for its destined owner, the World Emperor. Although the World Emperor was extraordinary, he was just an ordinary person after all. Under the terrifying impact of the will that made even the heavens and earth produce murderous intent towards Luo Fan and completely erase Luo Fan, he simply couldn't resist at all. In the blink of an eye, his will was completely broken by the killing intent, and he was completely controlled by the killing intent. Thus, he completely disregarded his original reverence for Luo Fan and was directly driven by the martial soul to attack Luo Fan. At this moment, the range of the material void had already spread from the sky to the ground. In other words, the range of the void had already reached a huge sphere with Luo Fan as the center and the distance between him and the ground as the radius. The change in the void of the material void was not obvious. After all, although there were countless materials in the sky, these materials were generally invisible. Even if it was void, the change wouldn't be big to ordinary people, and they wouldn't be able to see it at all. When the range of the material voids reached the ground, the changes became extremely obvious. Large tracts of land suddenly began to become more and more transparent, and finally disappeared completely at a certain moment, as if it had never existed. The place where it disappeared wasn't absolute nothingness, but chaos that was becoming more and more obvious. This chaos was the chaos of the world, space, energy, and nomological laws at the same time. It was like a bomb waiting to be ignited, as if it could explode at any time and completely destroy the entire world. However, it hadn't reached its limit yet. It just hadn't completely exploded yet. The range of the void became wider and wider, and more obvious. The aura that was about to explode also became more and more obvious. Under such circumstances, the martial soul that had transformed into a 5-clawed golden dragon charged straight at Luo Fan and naturally crashed into the sphere of the material void. In an instant, tiny scars appeared on the martial soul. These scars were caused by the martial soul being unable to resist the change of the nomological laws of the material void. Although the martial soul wasn't material, however, after fusing with living beings, it already possessed the characteristics of material, so it was naturally affected by the change of the nomological laws of matter. However, although the change of the nomological laws of matter affected the martial soul, it wasn't much. Soon, the martial soul had already charged in front of Luo Fan, condensed all its power, compressed it into a ball, and suddenly spat it out of its mouth, charging at Luo Fan. This ball of power didn't cause any changes to the time, space, energy, or nomological laws of this world. On the contrary, all these existences completely condensed their power into the ball of power. From a distance, it looked like the ball of power had become a black hole, frantically absorbing everything in the outside world, whether it was time, space, energy, or nomological laws. The effect was shocking beyond imagination. Luo Fan's expression remained indifferent when he saw this change. With a thought, his time dimension changed, and his body instantly became void. As he became void, he raised his hand and struck the copper ruler in front of him. The ball of power itself was all-encompassing. Luo Fan's body was in another time dimension, so he could naturally resist most of the power, preventing most of it from affecting his body. However, it wasn't possible to perfectly block that power. After all, that power contained the power of time. The power of time could naturally resist the change of the time dimension. Therefore, even though Luo Fan's body had become void and avoided most of the impact, he would still be hit by that power if he didn't have any other means. He still wouldn't be able to escape. However, the situation was different at this moment. At this moment, in the state of virtual transformation, Luo Fan blasted the copper ruler in his hand forward. In an instant, an incomparably pure space blasted out from his copper ruler and turned into a sphere of the same size as that power. Then, it suddenly collided with that ball of power. Amidst the loud rumbles, the force was smashed into smithereens, and all the force scattered in all directions. The impact and the changes caused were like the fuse that detonated a bomb, completely detonating the chaos in the spherical illusory area that had already reached deep underground. This time, there were no strange sounds. In silence, the space and time in the sphere completely collapsed, and the rules and principles completely disappeared. The world martial soul that was like a 5-clawed divine dragon, along with the world emperor within it, also completely disappeared in an instant. They were torn into pieces, and in the end, completely devoured by the absolute chaos, disappearing without a trace. This terrifying change was like pushing the first domino of a domino, causing a tragic chain reaction. Luo Fan didn't even need to continue to control the law of matter to continue to transform. The transformation of the law of matter was naturally pushed by the terrifying explosion, sweeping through the entire world and turning all the matter in the world into nothingness. In this nothingness, other existences such as time, space, energy, and law of laws were completely out of balance. They were ignited by the explosion and also exploded. The entire world was finally destroyed in the form of the void.